The guard birthed Alpha's secret son. Omegaverse Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Reinhardt. Chapter 1 The Missing Wolf. The ceremonial drums had begun their second cycle when Maeron turned, brows drawn in a taut line. "Where is he?" His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. In the vast marble hall of the Fenris Palace, the weight of silence collapsed around him like snow off a roof. The nobles lining the obsidian pillars dared not move. Only the echo of drums and torchlight flickering against gold-lined armor answered him. The throne dais stood bathed in silver light from the high crystal dome above. The gathered court, dressed in robes of blood red and morning black, had come to witness the last rite before his ascension, an ancient wolf-bound tradition marking his claim not only to the crown, but to every soul who would kneel before it. And yet the one who mattered most was not there. Maeron stepped forward, cloak brushing the polished onyx steps. "Where is Captain Evric?" A few gazes flicked toward each other, nervous, uncertain. Then, cutting through the air like a shard of glass, came the voice of Crown Princess Selene. "The man who shadows your every step?" she said, her lips curved in the faintest trace of mockery. Surely a loyal hound would not miss his master's coronation. Unless, of course, he's forgotten his place. Murmurs rippled like wind through tall grass. Advisors, soldiers, minor lords. No one dared speak too loud, but they all thought. Maeron could feel it, doubt tightening around him like a noose. His jaw ticked. Silence. One word. Enough to draw every whisper into the grave. Selene's gaze slid off him like water off polished steel. "Of course, Your Highness. I merely ask what the others dare not." Maeron's eyes, colder than frost, didn't linger on her. Instead, he turned sharply from the throne and strode down the aisle, past startled guards and priests. "Captain Thorn," he said as he passed the kneeling vanguard. "Yes, sire. Find him." The barracks should have been calm. No alarms. No enemy beyond the cold suspicion slinking through palace halls. But Maeron's arrival sent the inner court's steel-fanged unit into a quiet frenzy. Servants scurried. Gates flew open. His boots echoed against stone corridors built to withstand war. He didn't knock when he reached the officers' quarters. He didn't need to. The door swung inward, revealing the immaculate emptiness of Evric's chamber. Armor still hung neatly on the wall. The bed remained untouched. Maeron's fists clenched. Evric hadn't slept here last night. "Captain Thorn," he growled. "My prince. Has anyone seen Evric since the last patrol?" The captain's face went rigid. "He was relieved early yesterday evening. Said he needed time to prepare for today." "And you believed him?" Thorn swallowed. "Yes, Your Highness." Maeron's glare could have peeled flesh from bone. "Search every hall, every gate, every cursed stone of this place." He didn't wait for a reply. His instincts, wolf-born and sharper than most, dragged him toward the old southern wing. Once used as a fortress vault, now a storage site for records and seal chambers few visited. And then, in the cold hush of the deepest corridor, he caught it. A scent. Faint. Metallic. Familiar. Maeron's blood ran still. He followed it through 2 turns, past an iron-gated stair, and down to a stone room locked behind a forgotten arch. The door groaned when he shoved it open. He didn't feel his body move. Only the rush of scent, blood, salt, life, and the sight that waited beneath pale torchlight. Evric lay on the stone floor, half-curled, skin flushed with fever, tunic soaked through. His breath came in shallow pulls, forehead slick with sweat. In his arms, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that bore Maeron's own crest, was a child. A child. Maeron didn't speak. Couldn't. His feet carried him forward, slow, controlled, like approaching a wounded animal. Evric's eyes fluttered, then cracked open. The same ice gray that had watched his back on every battlefield, now dulled by pain and exhaustion. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Don't blame them." "Them?" Maeron's throat felt scraped raw. "You," he began, but his own voice failed. Evric's arms tightened reflexively around the infant. "It was my choice." Maeron stared. Words hung unspoken between them like a blade suspended mid-drop. "I wasn't forced," Evric whispered. "I offered. You were out of control." "I?" Maeron's breath hitched. That night, the last border war, he'd gone into a full-blood heat, a rare, dangerous frenzy triggered when alphas were wounded and pushed to the brink. He remembered nothing. "I didn't mean for it to happen," Evric murmured. "But I couldn't let you fall. You'd never forgive yourself for what you did in that state. So I—" His voice cracked. The child stirred. "I took the weight of it." Maeron felt something cold and bitter coil in his chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, too quietly. Evric's gaze drifted toward the wall. "What would you have done?" he said. "Paraded it in front of the court? Let them see what I am?" "I would've." "You would have done exactly what you're doing now. Look at you." Maeron stiffened. "And what is that?" "You're ashamed." The silence between them burned hotter than any forge. Maeron looked down at the baby. So small, so fragile, and yet the scent, his scent, clung to the boy's skin like fate. A truth too dangerous to name. "You are to tell no one," Maeron said finally. Evric closed his eyes. The words landed like a knife. "You'll return to your post," Maeron continued, voice sharp, cruel with precision. "This child will be raised in the palace under another name, and you will forget this ever happened." Evric didn't respond. The baby whimpered. Maeron stepped back. Not out of mercy, out of fear, not for the child, but for the part of him that wanted, with terrifying clarity, to reach out and stay. He turned. "I will send someone for you. Clean yourself up." At the door he paused, not looking back. "You disobeyed an order," he said, voice low. "That cannot happen again." A beat passed. Then, "Understood, Your Highness." Maeron flinched, but he didn't look back. Not even when the child cried again. Chapter 2: The Wolf's Shame. The child slept fitfully, swaddled in the folds of a navy silk cloak that once belonged to Maeron himself. Evric sat rigid in the velvet-backed chair, a ghost of himself, pale, sweat still cooling on his temples, eyes locked on the floor of the inner chamber where polished stone reflected too much of the firelight. Across from him, Maeron stood. His posture was stiff, regal, prince cloaked in control. But his voice, "Say it again." Evric flinched. "My lord." "Say it," Maeron snapped. "Out loud. Every word of it." There was no court here, no audience to bear witness. Just the scent of old cedar, firewood, and something far too intimate. The lingering edge of blood, of birth, of salt. Evric's throat worked, but his voice came as a whisper. "You don't remember." Maeron said nothing. Evric's gaze finally lifted, slow, heavy. "The border skirmish. You were wounded, fevered. Your alpha instincts were—" he swallowed. "Fractured. You couldn't tell friend from foe." A pause. "Not even me." A flicker crossed Maeron's expression. Not quite memory. A tremor, perhaps, beneath the stone. "I tried to hold you down," Evric went on. "I thought I could bring you back." He gave a broken laugh, choked more than amused. "But I was wrong. You didn't recognize me. Not even my voice." Maeron's hands flexed at his sides, the tendons sharp beneath his gloves. "I should have run," Evric whispered. "But I didn't. I thought, if it had to happen, let it be me. Let it end with me, not some helpless soldier." "And so," Maeron said, voice ice, You let yourself be. Yes, Evric said quickly, his words ragged. I chose it. I stayed. I made the choice because I knew you would never forgive yourself if you had hurt someone else. The silence that followed was not peace. It was pressure, thick, suffocating, loud in its stillness. Evric lowered his head. I did it for you, he said. And I told no one. Carried it alone. I thought that would be enough. Maeron stared at the child. He hadn't looked directly at the boy since they'd entered the room. Not really. The infant stirred, a tiny fist rising above the wrap. His scent curled into the air like smoke. Maeron turned away. You thought wrong. Evric blinked, the words striking more sharply than any blade. You think this, Maeron gestured vaguely to the cradle, makes you loyal? You think I asked for your sacrifice? No, Evric said, small. You didn't. And yet here you are, Maeron growled, bearing my shame like a banner. Evric paled. It wasn't shame, my prince. It was duty. Maeron's expression contorted, not in rage, but in something more dangerous. Fury without direction. You should have let me fall. I couldn't. Then you are a fool. Evric didn't argue. He didn't need to. The silence filled in every word he wouldn't say. The door creaked. Neither turned. But from behind the embroidered veil, Celine's shadow lengthened across the floor, elegant and slow. She stepped inside with no fanfare, her silken skirts whispering like snakeskin. The moonlight caught on the delicate silver chain at her temple, highlighting the sharp tilt of her brows. Her gaze fell on the child first, then Evric, then Maeron. Well, she said softly, I see we've all made ourselves comfortable in this intimate little mess. Maeron's mouth tightened. This doesn't concern you. Oh, I think it does, Celine said smoothly. When the crown prince's most trusted guard is found giving birth in a storage room and the child bears your eyes, it concerns the entire kingdom. Maeron's jaw clenched. You will not speak of this to anyone. Celine walked over to the cradle and looked in. The child blinked up at her, barely aware. Her fingers hovered just above his forehead. So it's true, she murmured. The bastard has your scent. Maeron crossed the room in 2 strides and seized her wrist. Do not call him that. Her eyes widened only slightly. Ah, so now he's yours. Evric didn't lift his head. He didn't breathe. Maeron let go of her wrist. Celine smiled, something cool and wicked curling behind her lips. I see, she said. You fear the court, the scandal, the whispers. Enough. She tilted her head toward Evric. Then you'll do what's expected. You'll make him disappear. Or, her smile sharpened, you'll give the child to someone respectable. Someone who knows how to raise wolves. Maeron looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. I'll do what I must. Celine turned away, pleased. But Maeron wasn't looking at her anymore. He turned back to Evric, who hadn't moved. You will not speak of this again, he said. Not to me. Not to anyone. Evric nodded slowly, like a man sinking. Yes, your highness. Maeron's gaze lingered on the child. Then, with a breath he didn't want to take, he lifted the boy gently from the cradle and handed him to Celine. From this moment, he said flatly, he is my ward, my godson. You will raise him as yours. Celine arched a brow. You would have me raise a child born of scandal and disgrace? Maeron's tone didn't shift. You would have me remain loyal to the alliance with your father's kingdom. Celine's smirk froze, just for a breath. Then she inclined her head. Very well. She cradled the boy with surprising ease. Evric sat motionless, staring straight ahead as though turned to stone. Maeron didn't look at him again. He didn't have to. The pain on Evric's face was carved deep and silent, a kind of devastation that made no sound, needed no words. And as the doors closed behind the prince and princess, Evric remained alone in the inner chamber, staring into the fire, hollow-eyed and silent. Chapter 3: Chains of Loyalty. The clang of steel echoed across the training grounds, a steady rhythm of blades striking shields and grunts muffled beneath breathless discipline. Dust curled up beneath leather boots, the scent of sweat and iron thick in the mid-morning air. Evric moved with effort. His blade swept low, parried, reversed. Again. He was too slow. Every movement betrayed him. His footing faltered on the churned dirt. His arms trembled with fatigue. Beneath the tight wrap of his tunic, his ribs still ached from a body barely recovered. And deeper still, the phantom pain where the child had once been nestled, now replaced by emptiness. But he did not yield. A younger soldier charged, blade raised. Evric blocked, barely. The force sent him staggering back a step, breath catching in his throat. "Again!" barked the training commander. Evric nodded tightly, teeth clenched. Sweat dripped down the back of his neck. His muscles screamed, lungs heaving as if through water. The scent of crushed dust and bodies tried to overtake him, but his own scent, stripped by suppressant drafts, was a hollow echo now, sterile and thin. Beta as far as any nose could tell. He was a ghost of himself. From the raised platform, Maeron stood watching. He said nothing, not at first, not as Evric's knees buckled for a half-second before he caught himself. Not as one of the recruits muttered, "The prince's dog's gone lame." Not as the soldier opposite Evric glanced sideways, uncertain whether to strike harder or pull his blow. Evric adjusted his grip on the hilt. "Again," he rasped. The sparring resumed. Finally, Maeron descended the steps, boots striking the wood with slow precision. The training yard grew quiet not by order but instinct. One by one, soldiers stilled, eyes sliding toward the prince. Maeron walked to where Evric stood, breathless and pale beneath a film of sweat, his hand still clutching the sword as though it were the only thing holding him upright. "Is this what passes for readiness now?" Maeron asked, voice sharp and cutting. "A soldier who trembles under his own weight?" Evric straightened. He didn't speak. Maeron's eyes swept him coldly. "You were given time to heal. I granted it, despite your disgrace." A muscle in Evric's jaw twitched. "And yet you return like this?" Maeron continued, tone louder now, for all to hear. "Barely able to hold a blade. Stinking of weakness." "I can still fight," Evric said hoarsely. Maeron stepped closer. "Can you?" "Yes." "Prove it." Without warning, Maeron drew his own sword and swung. Evric parried, but the force sent him to one knee. The blade scraped his collarbone. Not enough to draw blood, but enough to humiliate. Enough to remind him where he stood. A hush fell. Maeron stared down at him, blade lowered, his voice low. "If you cannot fight, Evric, then you have no place at my side." Evric looked up, eyes hollow but hard. "Then I will fight until I fall." They stared at each other, Alpha and Shadow, Prince and Ghost. Maeron sheathed his sword with a sharp click. "Then get up." Evric obeyed, limbs stiff. Maeron turned and walked away, never once looking back. The murmurs resumed as the prince vanished through the corridor of the outer barracks. Some voices were amused, others uncertain, but one lingered just beyond the gates, low, amused, dangerous. A man in a dark cloak leaned against the shade of the watchtower, barely visible. Well, he murmured to no one at all. The loyal mutt's starting to limp, and then he disappeared into the shadows. That night the palace slept, but not Maeron. He stood by the northern balcony, the moonlight silvering his hair, gaze locked on the distant silhouette of the training yard, now empty and still. Behind him, The steward of coin waited in silence. Maeron spoke without turning. I want an estate drawn up. A quiet one. Near the borderlands. The steward blinked. My prince. Add a chest of gold. A guard detail. Let it seem a reward for years of service. The steward hesitated. For Evric, my lord? Maeron's voice dropped. Do I need to repeat myself? No, your highness. It will be done. Good. The steward bowed low and left, boots fading into the distance. Maeron remained still. Below, a torch flickered by the barracks gate. The wind shifted. He could almost scent the sharp tang of iron and sweat again, could almost hear the dull thud of a blade against weakened arms. He hated it. Not Evric. Not truly. He hated the mirror Evric had become. A reflection of what should never have happened. A reminder of shame, of guilt, of a night lost to instinct and memory, and a child now held in the arms of a queen he barely trusted. He had told himself to bury it. He had told himself it was over. But still Evric remained. Quiet, defiant, present, loyal, too loyal. The next morning Evric was first in the ring. His limbs still ached, but he showed no sign. He sparred in silence, his blade clean, his posture tight. He bled once, when a recruit's sword bit too deep, but he tied a strip of linen round the wound and carried on. His scent remained flat, suppressed, masked, but his eyes burned. When the sun reached its peak, Maeron descended once more. He said nothing, watched only as Evric disarmed a heavier soldier with one clean turn of the wrist. Then, as Evric passed him, Maeron said low enough for only him to hear, You could have taken the land. Evric paused, but didn't turn. And left you unguarded? You would have been safe. I was not born to be safe, Evric murmured. I was born to serve. Maeron said nothing. Evric's grip tightened on his blade. So long as I can hold a sword, I will stand where I belong. Even if it kills me. A muscle ticked in Maeron's jaw. He wanted to say fool. He wanted to say stop. But instead he walked away. And Evric turned back to the ring. Sweat on his brow. Blood on his sleeve. Heart laid bare in silence. Behind the barracks, hidden by the wall, the cloaked shadow returned. This time he smiled. Well now, Draven's scout whispered. Isn't this interesting? Chapter 4 Whispers in the Court. The royal council hall smelled of old cedar and polished gold, of power marinated in age, masked by incense and velvet. Stained glass windows fractured sunlight into sharp blue shards across the floor, and beneath them sat the Fenris nobility, tight-lipped, jewel-draped, and watching. At the head of the crescent-shaped table, Crown Prince Maeron sat with one arm draped across the carved wolf head of his chair. His eyes were unreadable, cold, regal. He did not fidget, nor blink unnecessarily. Not even when Evric entered behind him, dressed in formal uniform, the hilt of his ceremonial sword glinting at his side. Whispers followed the soldier like perfume. He heard them, soft and sharp, tucked between breath and fan, just loud enough. His recovery was rather swift, wasn't it? A beta would never have survived childbirth like that. I heard he doesn't even scent like one anymore. And that child. Silence. Hissed a counselor too old for gossip but too amused to conceal his smirk. You'll have the prince's blade at your throat. Across the chamber, seated in her silver-gilded chair, Queen Consort Selene lifted her eyes from her goblet. She watched the way Maeron's jaw clenched ever so slightly, the way his gaze flicked not toward Evric, but toward the one speaking. One noble, a younger lord from the southern bloodline, cleared his throat dramatically. With respect, your highness, he said with a false bow of his head. Your vice-captain's return to service has been miraculous, almost unnatural. The healers speak of strength unbefitting a common beta. Evric's hand curled slightly around his sword's hilt. The noble continued, fangs hidden behind velvet smiles. Of course, the court must be assured no hidden entanglements have been overlooked. It is our duty, after all, to maintain the purity of your war council. A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber like a snake slipping into grass. Celine didn't blink. She sipped her wine. Evric stood behind Maeron, eyes downcast, still as stone, but tension coiled through every line of his body. He'd expected this. The rumors, the doubt, the questions about his blood, his body, the child. But to hear it spoken aloud, veiled in civility and daggered amusement, he wanted to bite down on his tongue until it bled. Maeron rose. The room fell silent. His voice, when it came, was low and sharp enough to make the tapestries tremble. This is my court. No one breathed. My blade answers to no bloodline but mine. My command requires no purity beyond loyalty. And my vice-captain, his eyes settled directly on the young lord, has bled more for this kingdom than any man seated here in silks and family crests. The lord stiffened. Maeron stepped down from the dais, each bootfall echoing louder than the last. He stopped a single step in front of the noble and tilted his head. Do you question my judgment? And no, your highness. I merely meant. Maeron unsheathed his sword. It whispered free of its scabbard like breath on steel. If there is anyone in this hall, Maeron said slowly, raising the blade, who dares speak another word against my second in command, I will silence you myself. Permanently. The noble paled. A breath. Then another. No one spoke. The sword returned to its sheath with a decisive click. Maeron turned, his face a perfect mask of composed wrath. Now, he said, walking back to his seat, let us speak of trade routes and fortifications. The council may leave conjecture to the gossips who hang by the kitchen doors. Celine set her goblet down, the glass chiming against the table. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The rest of the session passed with stilted efficiency. No one addressed Evric. No one dared. When the meeting finally ended, nobles filtered out like mice avoiding a hound. Maeron lingered at the head of the hall, his expression unreadable as Evric approached with slow steps. My prince, Evric murmured, bowing his head low. Maeron looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time that day. You didn't flinch. Evric's throat bobbed. Would it have mattered if I had? Maeron said nothing. A pause hung between them. Then Maeron turned and walked away. Evric remained a moment longer, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the carved floor until the shadows swallowed Maeron's retreating form. Then another voice came. Cool. Crisp. You still think he protects you? Evric straightened. Queen Celine stood beside him, her presence ghost-like in its suddenness. She looked toward the empty throne, where Maeron had sat moments before, and then to Evric. Her eyes were hard, pale like a moonlit mirror. He doesn't guard you, Evric, she said. He guards his image, his pride, the bloodline that must not be tarnished, the crown that must remain untouchable. Evric didn't respond. He threw a sword for you today, she continued, circling him like a hawk. But if you think that sword is love, you are more naive than I thought. I never asked for love, he said softly. No, she agreed, a cruel curl to her lips. Only loyalty, which is far more dangerous. She leaned in, her voice a whisper now, scented like white lilies and venom. You think he'll keep your secret out of affection. But when the cost becomes too high, when your very presence threatens what he's built, he will let you burn. She turned without waiting for a response, her skirts trailing behind her like spilled ink. Evric stood alone in the council hall. He looked up once, to the wolf banner hanging from the vaulted ceiling. It bore the royal crest, a silver wolf on black, crowned in gold. And beneath it, a man like him had no crest, no place, no name, only a sword, and scars that could never be spoken of. Chapter 5 Beneath the Moonlight. The moonlight spilled like silver silk over the palace garden, pooling between the stepping stones and dappling the rose-covered trellises in hues of pale blue and frost. It was quiet, as it always was after the court had been dismissed and the torches extinguished. Only the rustle of leaves stirred the night, until the sharp, wet sound of coughing broke the stillness. Evric stumbled against the marble balustrade, one hand clutching his chest, the other trembling where it braced his weight. The breath tore out of him in a violent shudder. Something hot and metallic filled his mouth, and when he coughed again, a bloom of dark red splattered against the pale stone. His knees buckled. He tried to steady himself, tried to remember how to breathe, but the garden spun, the scent of crushed lavender, damp soil, and the faint trace of his own suppressed scent mixing in his nose, twisting nausea into every inhale. He didn't hear the footsteps until they were too close. Evric. The voice was low, sharp, familiar. Maeron. Evric turned his head weakly, blood smeared at the corner of his mouth. Your Highness, he gasped, trying to stand straight, to present himself with the minimal dignity he had left. Forgive me. Another cough racked through him. He doubled over, more blood spattering across the mossy path. Maeron reached him in 3 long strides. His arms came around Evric without hesitation, strong, certain, and lifted him from the cold stone as if he weighed nothing at all. You're burning? Maeron muttered, his voice tighter now, the cold edge of command cracking at the seams. Damn it! What did they give you? Evric tried to answer, but the words came as another fit of coughing. The pain was sharp and low, like a thread being yanked loose inside him. It's the suppressant, he finally choked out. The dosage too strong. Maeron swore under his breath. He didn't call a servant. He didn't shout for a physician. He simply turned and carried Evric through the garden, the moon casting their shadows long behind them, through corridors and locked doors into his own private chambers. The doors shut with a soft thud. Maeron set him down gently on the edge of the bed, where crimson sheets tangled with dark velvet. He fetched a cloth and a basin, his movements brisk but clumsy, unpracticed. Evric shivered. His hair stuck to his temples with sweat. His skin, usually fair and sharp with control, now looked fragile, hollowed. Maeron knelt in front of him, the cloth warm in his hand as he wiped the blood from Evric's chin, his neck, the front of his ruined uniform. The prince's hands trembled once, then steadied. You should have told me, Maeron muttered, dipping the cloth again. Evric's breath hitched. It didn't matter. It does. Evric forced his eyes open, glassy and dull with exhaustion. I can't be a weakness in your army, Your Highness. You've made that clear. Maeron's jaw clenched. The water in the basin rippled as he wrung the cloth too tight. I said those words, he admitted quietly. But I didn't mean. Evric cut him off with a bitter smile. It's not your fault. You were kind to me once. That was already more than I deserved. Maeron froze. Evric leaned back against the headboard, his chest heaving shallowly. He looked toward the open window, where the moonlight poured in like a silent witness. I've never asked for anything, he whispered. Not even when I should have. You shouldn't have had to. I knew what I was, Evric said, voice fading with each syllable. Just a sword, a shadow, a body meant to shield yours. Nothing more. Maeron didn't respond. He stood there unmoving, watching the man who had bled for him, who had borne his child, hidden his pain, and come back broken just to keep standing behind his throne. Evric's eyes fluttered closed. I'll keep serving, he breathed. As long as you need me. The words hung there, soft and heavy. Then, too soft to be intended for Maeron's ears, he added, "Even if it kills me." Maeron moved before he could think better of it. He sat beside the bed, one hand catching Evric's jaw and tilting it up. The skin beneath his fingers was too warm. "Fragile. Why do you still say that?" he asked. The words came out raw. "After everything?" Evric didn't open his eyes. "Because it's you," he murmured. "And because I love you." The silence that followed was not peaceful. Maeron inhaled sharply, then leaned closer, his breath ghosting over Evric's cheek. His lips hovered a mere inch away. He could feel the pull, the siren call of that confession, the ache of years unspoken between them. A part of him wanted to surrender to it, to press his mouth to Evric's and taste all the pain, all the loyalty, all the love laced in that fevered breath. But he didn't. At the last moment, Maeron stopped. His eyes closed tight. He exhaled like a man breaking. Then he stood and stepped away, as if burned. Evric stirred faintly, his head turning just enough to murmur, "I know I don't deserve it." Maeron turned his back to him. "You're right," he said quietly. "You don't." Evric didn't respond. He was already asleep. But Maeron stayed by the window until dawn, fists clenched at his sides, watching the moon sink behind the horizon, taking its truth with it. Chapter 6: The Shadows Return. The wind in the north carried a sharper bite than most men could stomach. It howled like an animal through the pine-split ridges, rattling the canvas of the encampment pitched in the shadow of frost-cloaked cliffs. Soldiers muttered of wolves, but the scent in the air was older than any beast, thick with iron and secrets, threaded with ash. Draven didn't flinch as the gale cut across his exposed neck. He stood at the edge of the fire circle, watching the flames spit and claw at the sky, golden embers scattering like blood against snow. Behind him, the red fangs stirred, barefoot warriors daubed in crimson dye, eyes glowing faintly under the hoods of their ceremonial pelts. And then came Vera. She moved without a sound, her cloak dragging behind her like a veil of coiled serpents. Her face was pale beneath the war paint, each cheekbone slashed with vermilion in jagged lines. But it was her eyes, black irises ringed in red, that made men forget how to speak. Draven didn't bow. He never had. "You came," he said. "You summoned me?" Vera replied, her voice a rasp of silk and smoke. "That is not the same as obedience." A thin smirk tugged at Draven's mouth. "Yet you came." She stepped into the circle of firelight, and the red fangs drew back, bowing their heads. "Speak then," she said. "If your news is worthy, I may listen. If not, I'll carve your tongue for wasting my time." Draven unhooked a leather scroll from his belt and tossed it into the fire. The flames licked across the wax, curling parchment into glowing ash. "Forget ink. I want no record of this." Vera arched one painted brow. Draven's voice dropped lower. "There is an Omega in the capital." The fire cracked. "A rare thing," Vera said mildly, "but hardly worth calling me across the mountains." "He's not just any Omega." Draven took a slow step forward. "He's the father of the prince's bastard son." Silence. The fire flickered wildly between them. Vera tilted her head, the motion oddly predatory. "Prince Maeron has no Omega consort." "No," Draven said, "because the Omega was never meant to bear him anything. He's a beta, or so the court believes. Maeron's guard. Loyal. Silent. Hidden in plain sight." He let the weight of it settle, watching the recognition dawn in her sharp eyes. "You're certain?" she asked. Draven smiled without warmth. "I was there when the first rumors reached my ears. Then I saw him with my own eyes. Pale. Fevered. Clinging to life after giving birth in the shadows of the palace. They've buried the story deep, but I've found the cracks. Vera's hands folded before her, long fingers brushing the fangs on her belt. If the red moon finds him, she whispered, we could complete the rite. His body, already primed by royal seed, would open the veil, a vessel made of both betrayal and blood. Draven didn't respond. He didn't need to. You want us to take him, she said. I want the capital to burn, Draven said. You want your god's teeth in the sky again. We are not enemies. Not yet, she corrected. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of pine sap and distant smoke. Vera turned to her warriors, speaking in the guttural snarl of her tongue. They responded like wolves, low and fervent. We'll send two, she said. No more. If they fail, we fall back. If they succeed. She met Draven's eyes. The boy will be ours. A flicker of emotion, something feral, crossed Draven's face. He looked past the fire, into the dark woods. He never should have had that child, he muttered. Not him. Not after what he did. Vera's voice curled around him like fog. You hate him. Draven said nothing. Good, she whispered. Hate will guide the blade. They stood in silence as the snow began to fall, fine, dry flakes that dusted the tents and firelight like bone. The Red Fangs moved quietly, packing their satchels, slinging iron hooks and poisons across their backs. Far south, past the ridge line and the frost-crowned watchtowers, the royal palace slept beneath moonlit spires. And within it Evric slept too, curled into a narrow cot in the servants' barracks, breath faint and shallow from a new dose of suppressants. A single lamp burned beside him, casting shadows over his thin wrists, the faint bruise beneath one collarbone. His child, Maeron's child, was tucked safely in the wing of the royal nursery, guarded by a dozen blades. But it wouldn't be enough. Not now. Not with Red Fangs coming. Not with vengeance sharpening its claws beneath the ice. Outside the palace walls, far beyond the range of any watchful eye, a shadow detached itself from the trees. Silent, hooded, it scaled the wall like a spider, claws catching on old stone. Paused at the top. The moon turned its face away. Then the shadow dropped inside. Chapter 7, The Queen's Hand. The Queen's chamber was a cathedral of silence. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting thin golden veils over marble floors. Everything gleamed, polished wood, carved columns, the crystal decanter of lilac-scented water resting untouched on a silver tray. But beneath the pristine calm, there was weight, the kind of weight that made lesser men drop their knees to the floor without knowing why. Evric didn't kneel, but he stood very still. His uniform was too tight across his ribs. The corset-like underbandage bound around his middle, necessary to keep from coughing blood in front of the court, bit into healing skin. The suppressants left his limbs weak, but his posture was perfect. Always perfect. Across the room, Queen Selene closed a leather-bound book, her fingers pale against the soft gray of her sleeves. She looked up slowly. Her beauty was not of warmth or light, but symmetry. Cold, statuesque, the kind of elegance that cut as easily as it awed. Captain Evric Thornefell, she said. The shadow that guards my husband's shadow. He bowed his head. Your Highness. I called for you an hour ago. My apologies. I was with the weapons master. She hummed. Not disbelieving, but not interested. Do you know why you're here? No, Your Highness. You do. She rose, letting her gown whisper over the floor like smoke. Step by step, she approached until they were an arm's length apart. Evric didn't raise his eyes. Selene studied him, her gaze lingering at the hollow of his throat, the edge of a bruise just barely visible beneath his collar. Her voice, when it came, was soft. You're still bleeding. A pause. Then, the healers say it's healing. Slowly. I see. She walked behind him, trailing one finger lightly across the back of his shoulder as she passed. Evric flinched, but didn't step away. You're very loyal, Captain. Yes, Your Highness. To a fault. He didn't answer. You've given everything for him, she continued. Your health, your name, your discretion. Her voice sharpened slightly on the last word, like a knife tapped against crystal. Evric's jaw tensed. You've borne him a son, hidden, unmarked, unclaimed. I ask nothing in return, he said quietly. Celine stopped in front of him again. Her expression didn't change, but something colder slipped into her tone. Of course you don't. That's what makes you dangerous. That, finally, made his eyes rise. Not in defiance, in confusion. She stepped closer. My husband is next in line to rule this fractured kingdom. Every day the court grows sharper. Enemies multiply like wolves in snow. A single misstep could undo decades of planning. And you, Captain, are a misstep that walks and breathes. I would never. She cut him off with a look. You exist. That's enough. You are not his bonded mate. You're not even of a noble line. You're a lie. A vulnerability. Evric's throat worked. If it would serve the crown better, I'll leave, he said. If His Highness commands it. Celine tilted her head. You'd disappear? Just like that. If he wished it, Evric said, voice steady despite the tension burning under his skin. I would vanish. Without resistance. Without question. Celine stared at him. The silence stretched between them like a blade drawn taut. Then she laughed. It wasn't mocking, but it wasn't kind. How simple men are when they love, she said. You mistake obedience for devotion, sacrifice for honor. But loyalty is just another blade, and you... She reached out, gripping his chin in her hand, lifting his face until their eyes met. You are a weapon Maeron keeps sheathed because he is ashamed to wield it. Evric didn't speak. He couldn't. The Queen held him there a moment longer, reading something in the pain behind his stillness, and then released him with a flick of her hand. She turned back toward her desk. Very well, she said. You've made your position clear. She sat, smoothing a scroll flat. I won't order you to leave. Not today. But should the time come when His Highness must choose between your shadow and his crown, I trust you'll be obedient. I will. She smiled. Not kindly. Good. Then I'll wait for his choice. A knock sounded at the chamber doors. A maid peered in, hesitating under the Queen's gaze. Your Highness, the nursery sends word. The child, he's... Celine lifted a hand, silencing the girl. I'll attend shortly. The maid bowed and vanished. Evric, still standing in the center of the room, clenched his fingers into his palms. Celine didn't look at him again. You may go, she said. He bowed once more, then turned and left, each step echoing too loudly in the heavy silence. Outside, the corridor was cool. His breath shook as it left him. One hand pressed briefly to his chest, as if to contain whatever cracked behind his ribs. He had promised to vanish, and if Maeron ever said the word, he would. Chapter 8: The Cracks. The throne hall was draped in banners of blood red and dusk gold, sunlight pooling in onyx tiles like molten amber. Incense coiled in the air, perfumed and suffocating, while armored guards stood like statues along the towering pillars. The Morning War Council had gathered beneath the gaze of a king not yet crowned, and the weight of power, or its lack, hung thick in every breath. Maeron sat on the high seat, not yet the throne of a sovereign, but carved to imply one. The iron crest of the royal wolf gleamed behind him, sharp-toothed and eternal. His gloved hand rested on the hilt of his ceremonial blade, his expression carved in stone. Evric stood 2 paces behind him to the right. As always, his posture was flawless, but his shoulders had thinned. The once broad stance of the palace's most feared swordsman had narrowed under months of silent strain. His skin was too pale, and the flush on his cheek wasn't from heat. He kept his eyes low. Around them, voices clashed in courtly tones. "My lords, the eastern garrison requires resupply," Lord Valen murmured. "Unless your highness expects our soldiers to feast on wind." "Noted," Maeron said curtly. "Captain Thornefell, confirm the allocation from the western stores." Evric stepped forward with a nod, unrolling a parchment with slightly trembling hands. "The 4th and 5th Reserve units are currently stationed at—" "Forgive me, your highness." Queen Celine's voice sliced clean through the hall. She didn't look at Evric as she rose from her seat beside the dais. She didn't need to. "I do wonder," she continued, with an artful trace of a smile, "whether it is truly wise to entrust matters of national supply to one not in full health." Evric stiffened, hands tightening around the scroll. The court fell silent. Too silent. Maeron's knuckles whitened around his sword hilt. "Captain Thornefell," Celine went on, now turning slightly, just enough for her words to settle like frost, "has long served the realm. But perhaps it is time to consider whether other talents might serve your highness better." A ripple of soft voices stirred the chamber. Evric did not move. He only bowed low and precise. "If her highness doubts my usefulness, I shall." "You shall do nothing," Maeron said. The words were sharp. Too sharp. His voice echoed across the stone with clipped fury. Celine tilted her head. "Forgive me, husband. I spoke only with the kingdom's best interests." "You spoke out of line." The murmurs cut off like a blade through breath. Maeron stood, the movement fluid but edged with something volatile. The kind of motion that came before a fight, not a diplomatic retort. His gaze swept the court, cold, radiant with restrained violence. "You speak of usefulness?" he said, louder now. "Of strength? Do any of you forget the siege of Black Hollow? The ambush at Raven Cleft? The poison in Elric's keep?" He turned to face them all fully. "Had it not been for this man," a sharp gesture toward Evric, who still bowed without flinching, "I would have rotted beneath a traitor's blade a dozen times over." Silence. Stifling. Charged. Maeron's eyes were burning now. "And yet you question his worth?" One of the old generals cleared his throat nervously. Another averted his gaze. Celine's lips were curved in a tight line, her hands folded neatly, unmoved. Evric lifted his head slightly, and for the briefest moment, their eyes met. He did not smile. There was no pride in his gaze. Only the hollow ache of being defended too fiercely, too late, and too publicly. "I live because of him," Maeron said, quieter now. "That is not sentiment. That is fact." Another breath passed. He stepped back, voice steel once more. "If any man here would do better, let him try." No one did. The court remained silent. Maeron gestured toward the scroll in Evric's hands. "Continue." Evric bowed again, and his voice, when he spoke, was steady as ever, though a faint rasp crept through the words. "The stores are expected to arrive within a fortnight. The horses." But no one was truly listening now. The council continued, stiff, awkward, and brittle with tension. Maeron returned to his seat, jaw tight. Celine said nothing else. Her gaze remained fixed on the far wall, as if the moment hadn't happened. But it had. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard the quiver beneath the crown prince's voice, the raw emotion he had not meant to reveal. The veil had lifted, a crack had formed, and cracks, in courts like these, were a warning of collapse. Far above the council chamber, in the hollow of a sculpted balcony draped in ivy, a figure crouched behind the arching latticework. Wrapped in the leathers of a northern courier, a single gloved hand held a small spyglass steady, the lens glinting faintly in the midday sun. The spy didn't blink as they watched, didn't stir as Maeron's words echoed through the rafters, only smiled. The smirk was sharp, wolfish. "Well?" the shadow muttered to himself, lowering the glass. "Looks like the prince's little toy has teeth after all." He reached into his cloak and drew a rolled strip of parchment. Quick, practiced strokes. The message was brief. Evric holds sway. Maeron cracks. The queen resents. Time approaches. Send the hand. He tied the note to the leg of a waiting raven, dark as night, and let it soar into the open sky. Below, in the Hall of Power, cracks widened. Above, war watched and waited. Chapter 9, The Wolf's Burden. The scent of dried herbs clung to the infirmary walls, sharp and medicinal, never quite masking the underlying bitterness of blood and metal. Pale morning light filtered through narrow windows, catching dust in slow suspension. The royal healer's chambers were silent, save for the occasional rustle of parchment or clink of glass vials. Evric sat on the edge of the examination table, spine straight despite the tremor in his limbs. His shirt had been stripped away, revealing the fading lines of old scars across his back and chest, some surgical, some earned. His breathing was shallow, and a faint sheen of sweat gathered at his temples. The court physician, an aging man with deft hands and a permanently furrowed brow, adjusted the silver-rimmed spectacles on his nose. He said nothing for a long while, merely scanning the script of test results laid beside a half-used vial of suppressant. "I am not fragile," Evric said, breaking the silence. The physician's eyes flicked to him. "You are not immortal either. I've had worse. You didn't survive worse. You endured it. That's not the same." Evric exhaled softly, almost like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. His fingers curled against his thigh. The physician turned, folding his arms. "Years of suppressants have worn your organs thin. Your adrenal system is failing. Your omega markers are fluctuating erratically. And your body never fully recovered from the birth." Evric's jaw clenched. "You bleed too easily now. Your reaction times have dulled. You're not healing like before. And yet, you insist on returning to active service." "I must," Evric said simply. "There are other guards." There are no other guards for him. The words were quiet, but they carried a weight not even steel could rival. Before the physician could respond, the door slammed open. Maeron strode in like a storm, dark cloak thrown over one shoulder, boots heavy on the stone floor. His eyes landed on Evric immediately, narrowing with a fury that had not yet found direction. "What did he say?" he snapped at the physician. The older man raised a brow, unshaken. "I was just informing Captain Thornefell that his body is no longer suited for the demands of active duty." Evric opened his mouth, but Maeron cut him off with a glare. "And what does that mean?" Maeron asked, though the sharpness in his voice hinted he already knew. "It means," the physician replied evenly, "that if he continues pushing himself like this, we will be discussing his funeral arrangements before winter." Silence rang out, thick and deafening. Evric didn't flinch. He only looked away, eyes focused on a knot in the wooden floor. Maeron's fist came down on the edge of the table with a loud crack. "Then why the hell are you still standing, Evric?" Evric didn't move. "Do you want to die?" Maeron barked. "Is that it? Is your loyalty so blind you'll crawl into the grave just to follow a command I never gave?" "I wasn't following orders," Evric murmured. "I was protecting you." Maeron's voice dropped to a growl. "You're protecting nothing if you can't stay alive." Evric's throat tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "If I rest, if I pull back, they'll see it. The court, your enemies, they'll know I'm weak. They'll wonder what else you've hidden. And they will come for you. I am not a child behind your skirts, Evric." "I know that," he said softly. But they don't. Not yet. Maeron stepped forward, his shadow falling across Evric's bare shoulders. You think your death would save me? No, Evric said, eyes finally meeting his. I think my life might buy you time. Maeron's expression twisted, pain flashing behind the fury. And then, quieter, hoarser, You damn fool. Evric didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Maeron turned sharply to the physician. What does he need? Rest, a complete cessation of suppressants, and careful supervision. Maeron nodded once, then looked back at Evric. His tone was cold. You are relieved of duty until further notice. Evric stood, too quickly, wincing as the floor seemed to tilt beneath him. No, please, That was not a request. Maeron's voice had gone low and lethal. It was the voice of a ruler, not a man. Command no one defied. Evric staggered back half a step, but bowed. Yes, your highness. Maeron turned without another word and left. The room felt colder after he was gone. The physician returned to scribbling notes. Evric sat back down slowly, breathing shallowly. His limbs ached. His chest still burned from the earlier fit. But none of it hurt quite like those words. You are relieved of duty. As if duty had been the only thing keeping his bones from turning to ash. Night fell like ink, swallowing the sky. The palace grounds slept, but Evric did not. He sat alone in his quarters, the only sound the steady tick of a small iron clock and the occasional crackle of the fire. The room was modest for someone of his station, tucked into the guard wing. It smelled of iron polish, pine oil, and faint traces of something older, something no one spoke of anymore. On the table before him sat a familiar vial. Small, glass. The label was worn from years of use. The liquid inside shimmered faintly violet. Suppressant. He stared at it for a long time. His hand moved slowly, hesitant, trembling despite his usual precision. His fingers closed around the vial. He uncorked it. No fanfare, no hesitation. He tipped it back and drank. The taste was bitter as ash. It burned down his throat like guilt. Afterward, he pressed a hand to his chest. His heart fluttered unnaturally beneath his ribs. He clenched his jaw and forced himself not to cough. His hand fell away, limp in his lap. Across the room, a mirror reflected his silhouette. His frame looked smaller than it once had. Faded, like a shadow still pretending to be a man. Evric closed his eyes. He had protected Maeron. He would continue to protect him, even if it meant disappearing piece by piece until nothing was left. Chapter 10: The First Crack of War. The rain fell in thin, silvery lines, turning the cobbled streets of the capital into slick, glistening mirrors. Gaslight flickered dimly in the alleys, their flames swallowed by the creeping fog. It was the kind of night that kept nobles indoors and thieves awake, a night that swallowed footsteps and blurred blood into the stones. Evric moved through the back streets alone. The city behind the palace was a warren of alleys and forgotten corridors, a place only those like him once learned to navigate. Cloaked in black, hood drawn low, he walked swiftly, each movement precise. He hadn't told anyone he was leaving the grounds, but something had tugged at him all day, an unease, a prickle at the back of his neck. Even now, that feeling hadn't left. The suppressant burned in his veins, dulling his senses, but it couldn't fully mask the wrongness that lingered like rot in the air. He passed beneath a crooked archway. The moment his boots crossed the threshold, the hairs on his arms rose. Too quiet. He turned. The first blow came from the shadows, swift, silent, and aimed for his throat. Evric dropped low, the dagger barely grazing his shoulder as he twisted aside. Pain flared hot, but he was already moving, instincts flaring despite the wear in his bones. His elbow snapped into the attacker's ribcage, and a sharp grunt rewarded him. Another figure emerged, blade gleaming, and Evric barely parried the strike with his own short knife, pulled from beneath his coat. 3 more shadows encircled him. They moved like wolves, quick, synchronized, merciless. Red fang tattoos coiled on their wrists, the mark of the Crimson Fang. Evric's heart thundered. His blood roared, not from fear, from fury. "You chose the wrong night," he rasped, ducking another blade and slashing across the closest throat. Blood spattered warm across his hand. 1 down, but they kept coming. He fought like he had in the war, fast, lean, brutal. His breaths came sharp, each movement precise, honed from years of necessity. Yet the suppressant slowed his reflexes. His vision pulsed at the edges. His limbs began to lag behind his thoughts. One grabbed his arm. Another went for his back. He slammed his head into the nearest skull, felt the sickening crunch of cartilage. The man reeled, but Evric's knees buckled as another blade drove into his side. He gasped, knees hitting the stones, blood soaking into the street. "Take him," someone ordered in a low growl. "Alive!" Evric twisted with what strength he had left, knife lashing up, but it was batted away. Strong hands yanked him backward. A cloth pressed to his mouth, sharp with a numbing chemical. He thrashed, but his body betrayed him. The world tilted, narrowing to shadow. Then, a roar. Not human. A blur of motion crashed through the fog, and one of the Crimson Fang agents was lifted into the air, then torn apart mid-scream. Bones cracked. A body hit the wall with a wet sound. Another tried to flee, but his neck was split open before he could take 2 steps. Maeron's cloak cut through the mist like a blade, his sword already slick with blood. "Drop him," he snarled, voice low and deadly. The last attacker froze, blade still at Evric's throat. "I said drop him." The man hesitated. Maeron moved. The attacker's arm fell before he even realized the sword had moved. Then his head. Evric collapsed to the ground, limp, bloodied, breathing in broken gasps. Maeron dropped to his knees beside him, hands moving fast over his chest and side. "You idiot!" he hissed, voice shaking. "What were you doing out here alone?" Evric coughed, his mouth tasting copper. "Was just walking." "You are never just walking where assassins gather." Evric tried to sit up, but Maeron shoved him down with a hand to the shoulder. "Stay down." His voice left no room for argument. Maeron stood, turning to the narrow alley still fog-choked and littered with corpses. "Show yourselves," he barked. "If any of you are still breathing, I'll give you 3 seconds to beg." Silence. A few rats scurried past. Maeron sheathed his sword with a sharp twist and turned back. His hand hovered above Evric's cheek, then clenched. He didn't touch him, but his next words were thunder, low and absolute. "From this night forward, anyone who lays a hand on him dies." Evric blinked up at him, eyes glassy, dazed. A group of guards arrived, finally catching up. They froze at the sight of the bodies, and at the sight of their prince standing over Evric like a wrathful god. Maeron turned slowly, voice cold. This was not a random attack. They came for him. A murmur passed through the guards. "Have the city searched. Every alley. Every safe house. I want the Crimson Fang eradicated by dawn." "Your Highness," a captain bowed stiffly, eyeing the bloodied Omega at his feet. Maeron caught the glance. His hand twitched again, but this time he let it fall, to rest gently on Evric's hair, like a claim. A silent vow. "Anyone who speaks a word of this dies before the sunrise." Far above them, perched on a rooftop like a crow, Draven watched with a wry smile. So that was it. He'd heard rumors, but seeing it confirmed in blood was something else entirely. The prince, baring his teeth over a half-broken Omega like a wolf over his last scrap of sanity. "Fascinating," Draven murmured, flicking a speck of ash from his glove. Behind him, a scout crouched low. "Should we report?" Draven raised a hand. "No. Let them taste safety. Let the prince think he's won. The blood moon rises soon." He turned away, the fog swallowing him. "Their bond is his weakness," he said. "And weakness, in time, will break any crown." Chapter 11 The Scent of Betrayal. The moon floated pale and hollow above the royal garden, casting silver light on marble and moss. Petals stirred in the warm night air, heavy with the scent of blooming nightshade, jasmine, and something else, something faintly metallic and wrong. Evric moved slowly between the hedges, his cloak clutched too tightly around him. He should not have come out tonight. Every step echoed oddly against the stone paths. Every breath felt too deep, too full, like the air itself was thickened with a perfume meant to cling. His fingers trembled at his sides. Beneath his ribs, something shifted, tightened, then coiled back again like a tide held at bay. He swallowed hard. The suppressant was failing. He'd doubled the dose earlier, shaken by the attack in the alley, by the way Maeron had looked at him after cutting through those men like they were nothing. Something had cracked open in the prince's voice that night, something raw and dangerous and not meant for public ears. Anyone who touches him dies. And now this, his body betraying him in the quiet of the moonlight. He stopped beneath a black cypress tree, the tallest in the garden. The shadow cloaked him, helped him breathe, but the scent wouldn't leave. It was in his throat, in his blood, feral, familiar. He gritted his teeth. Not now, not here. He hadn't gone into heat in over 6 years. Not since the child. Not since the suppressants and blood thinners and bone-shaving pain that followed birth. The palace physicians had warned him, "You'll be weaker, but clean, safe, beta enough to pass." And he had passed. All this time. Until now. A soft sound, almost imperceptible, brushed the edge of his hearing. Leaves shifting. A breath that wasn't his. He froze, every nerve suddenly alert. A presence moved through the garden, not royal guard. Too quiet, too still. He backed into the shadows, palm brushing the hidden dagger at his hip. A figure passed between two columns, face veiled, gloved hand scattering a fine dust into the breeze. Evric's eyes widened. Not dust. Pheromone powder. Alpha grade. He choked back a curse, but it was too late. The air thickened at once, drugged with a scent that wasn't his but triggered everything inside him anyway. The heat hit him like a blade. His knees buckled. He gripped the tree behind him, heart slamming in his chest. His lungs refused to pull enough air. Everything, every sound, every light, every heartbeat, grew loud. Too loud. His skin prickled. His stomach clenched. Fire crawled down his spine and pooled between his legs, cruel and hungry and familiar in a way that made him want to scream. Not here. Please. Footsteps. Boots on stone. He stiffened as Maeron's voice cut through the quiet. Evric. No, not him. Not now. Evric. I saw you come out here. What? Maeron's words cut off as he reached the edge of the tree's shadow. His eyes adjusted in an instant. Evric, half crumpled, one hand braced against the bark, the other clutching his abdomen, jaw tight, sweat shining at his temple. And the scent, Maeron's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. The prince's expression hardened. What's happening to you? Evric didn't answer. He couldn't. He shook his head, eyes wide, mouth parting only to suck down the tainted air. His body trembled with restrained instinct, the fight not to yield more visible than anything he'd ever shown. Maeron stepped closer. Evric flinched. Don't. Maeron halted. His eyes narrowed. Who did this to you? Evric's hand reached blindly for his dagger. Go, he rasped. You shouldn't. You're burning up. Maeron crouched beside him now, voice lower. Not gentle, never that, but controlled. This isn't a fever. It's something else. Evric turned his face away. It's nothing. Maeron's hand darted out, fingers catching his jaw. Evric struggled, but his strength was ebbing, replaced by a tide of something worse. Need, raw and rising. You're shaking, Maeron said, voice tight now. You're not injured. This is. He trailed off, then said, almost too quietly, Are you? Evric's body gave a full shudder. A groan slipped out before he could stop it, shameful and low. Maeron stilled. Then, very slowly, his hand slid away from Evric's jaw. His eyes were dark. His voice was colder than winter. Tell me. Evric didn't answer. I said, tell me. He gasped, pressing his forehead to the bark. Not here. Please. Maeron didn't move for a moment. Then he reached out again and grabbed Evric's wrist. Evric jerked back, but not fast enough. Maeron pulled him into the light. Evric stumbled, cloak falling open. A faint mark glowed low on his abdomen, hidden by layers for years, dulled by suppression. But in this moment, with the induced heat, the Alpha's mark flickered like fire beneath his skin. Maeron stared. Evric wrenched away, falling hard to the marble bench behind him, one hand scrabbling to close the cloak again. Don't look at me like that, he hissed, voice hoarse with humiliation. But Maeron's eyes didn't leave him. You lied to me. Evric's throat closed. I asked you once, Maeron said, stepping closer. What you were. You said you were a beta, that you'd always been, that your usefulness was behind a sword, nothing more. I had to lie, Evric whispered, looking down. Did you? The accusation in his voice lashed across Evric like a whip. I've bled for you, Evric said, his voice trembling. I've broken every vow I ever swore to protect you. I gave up my body, my child, my name. He looked up. His eyes were wet, not from heat, but from something sharper. And still I would have gone to the grave pretending to be something less, something safe. For your sake. Maeron looked like someone had struck him. His voice, when it came, was low. Safe? You think this is about... I think, Evric interrupted. You'd rather I be convenient, disposable, like a sword, not a person who... He broke off, the heat rising again in his chest. He gritted his teeth, shoulders shuddering. Evric, Maeron said, more quietly now. Tell me the truth. Evric said nothing. Maeron knelt again, this time slower, searching his face. Are you in pain? Yes. Because of them? Evric shook his head. Because I'm trying not to touch you. That silenced the prince. The night throbbed between them, heat and jasmine and everything unspoken. Evric's hands fisted in the bench beneath him. He tried to stand again. Maeron caught his shoulder. I said don't move. Evric looked up, defiant. Maeron's jaw clenched. He leaned closer, his scent flaring with dominance, but tinged with something else. Curiosity. Hesitation. This heat, he said. It's artificial, isn't it? Evric gave a nod. Barely. Maeron's gaze darted toward the trees. A trap, Evric whispered. For both of us. A rustle in the hedges answered him. Maeron turned like a blade unsheathed. Guards, he barked. Steel rang out from hidden corners as red-robed figures fled into the dark. Evric didn't watch. He couldn't. He was curling in on himself now, barely aware of the fight, of the prince shouting commands, of footsteps crashing through foliage. His thoughts had narrowed to one unbearable need. Hide this. Bury this. Don't let him see what you are. Then Maeron returned. Evric didn't know how much time had passed. He only felt arms catch him before he slumped fully, one strong grip circling his back, the other pressing to his abdomen. He gasped and tried to pull away. Maeron didn't let go. "I'm taking you inside." "No. You're burning alive, and I am not leaving you here." Evric's voice cracked. "You can't bring me to the palace like this." "I can. They'll know. I don't care." Evric's head fell forward, and still Maeron did not let go. He lifted him easily, like he had that first time after the battlefield siege, when Evric had been half dead and refusing to rest. Now, too, he struggled weakly, but Maeron held tighter. "You've lied," he whispered, "and I don't forgive that. But God's help me, Evric. I can't let you break." Evric's breath caught. "I already have," he whispered. Maeron looked down at him. The prince's voice dropped to a rasp. "Then I'll carry what's left." He walked into the darkness, Evric trembling in his arms. Behind them, a thin figure in crimson robes stood at the edge of the trees, veil fluttering in the night wind. Vera's spy lowered her hood and smiled. "The wolf shows his heart," she murmured, "and the hound his teeth." She turned into the fog. "Soon, we'll tear both from their chests." Chapter 12, The Unforgivable. The door slammed shut behind them with a thud that echoed too long. Evric staggered as Maeron all but dropped him into the shadows of the training quarters' private chamber. The space was made of stone and silence. No windows, no guards, no scent of roses to mask the stench of what he'd become. Just them, just the fire. Evric's cloak was half torn, his hair damp from fever, and the heat, gods, the heat wouldn't end. He collapsed to his knees. "Don't touch me," he croaked. "Not again." Maeron didn't answer. He was pacing now, like a caged thing, like the predator he had always been and had taught Evric to be. But his hands, those hands that had always steadied Evric's sword, now trembled at his sides. Evric clutched at the cold stone floor, cheek pressed to it, begging it to cool him. Shame painted his skin in thick, burning strokes. "I didn't ask for this," he whispered, voice frayed. "I didn't want you to see me like this." "But I did," Maeron said. The words dropped like lead. Evric flinched. Maeron turned. His eyes were unreadable, no rage, no horror. Just a bleak calculation that chilled Evric far more than the heat burning through him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't," Evric said hoarsely. "You would have cast me out." "You think this is better?" Evric tried to speak, but nothing came. His body arched against the stone, the drug still thick in his blood. The false heat gnawed at him, peeled away pride and restraint and everything he'd built. He bit his tongue hard enough to taste blood. Maeron came closer, kneeling, still armored, still every inch a prince. A war-forged god towering over the thing beneath him. Evric closed his eyes. "You want me to look away?" Maeron asked, voice low. "No," Evric whispered. "Then tell me what you need." Evric choked on a sob. "You already know." For a breathless second, nothing moved. Then Maeron reached out, slowly. He pulled Evric upright by the shoulders, and for one unbearable moment, Evric collapsed against him, chest to chest, fire to flint. The contact was electric. Maeron's grip tightened. Evric was trembling, caught between hunger and hatred of himself. He wanted to vanish. He wanted to melt into the scent of the man who had trained him, trusted him, commanded him, and now held him like he was nothing more than a vessel full of heat and desperation. "Please," Evric said, voice cracking. "Either help me or kill me." "I should," Maeron said, "but I won't." He shoved Evric back just enough to see his face. "You're not a beta, not a soldier. You're an Omega," Evric whispered. "A liar, a traitor." Maeron's eyes darkened. and still he didn't let go. "You don't get to beg and blame me in the same breath," he growled. "You put yourself in my path. You swore to protect me. You gave yourself to me in every way that mattered, except the truth." Evric's breath hitched. The silence between them was pulsing. Then Maeron pulled him in again. The first kiss wasn't gentle. It was not born of tenderness but of fury and panic and something neither of them had the language for. Evric gasped into it, his body curling forward like it had been starved of this contact, of any contact. Maeron kissed like he fought, with control, with purpose, with the cruelty of a man who had denied himself everything for too long. And Evric kissed back like a drowning man, shame still burning. But the part of him that had longed for this, for him, won. He didn't know when they hit the floor, didn't care that Maeron's hands were rough, unyielding, or that every touch scraped open something he tried so hard to bury. It wasn't soft. It wasn't romantic. It was a collision. Maeron never spoke again. Not through the heat. Not even when Evric cried out against his shoulder. Unable to stop himself. Unable to pretend this wasn't what his body had been made to crave. Even when Evric sobbed in frustration, whispered, "I didn't want it to be like this," Maeron said nothing. He just moved harder, crueler. And when it was over, when Evric lay in a heap on the floor, trembling and silent, lips swollen from biting them shut, Maeron stood. No words, no warmth, no apology. Evric didn't dare look at him. He waited for the shame to settle like ash, for the scorn he'd always known was coming. Then Maeron spoke. "I won't tell anyone." Evric flinched. "No one will know what happened here. Not the guards. Not the court. Not even my advisors." Evric raised his head slowly, eyes red-rimmed and damp. Maeron's voice was ice. "But this—" He gestured to the space between them, to the bruises and the bruised soul still lying on the stone. "This never happens again." Evric's mouth parted. Maeron didn't give him a chance to speak. "You'll continue your post. You'll train. You'll fight. But we return to what we were. Nothing more." Evric sat upright, breath trembling. "You mean pretend none of it mattered?" "I mean survive it," Maeron said, already walking toward the door. Evric's voice was barely audible. "And what if I can't?" Maeron didn't look back. "Then pretend harder." He unlocked the chamber door. Cold air swept in. He was gone. Evric stared at the empty doorway. His body ached. His soul ached more. He pulled his cloak over himself with shaking hands, pressed his forehead to the floor, and breathed like a dying man. Outside the chamber, a shadow peeled away from the far column. Draven's spy lingered only a moment longer, then vanished down the corridor like a ghost in silk. She had heard enough. Chapter 13, The Fear. The rain had stopped by the time Evric reached the tower steps. It left the stone slick beneath his boots, but he welcomed the cold, welcomed the sting. It reminded him he was still a man, however loosely that word clung to him now. He climbed with purpose, though every muscle ached from the night before. His palms bled where his nails had broken skin. He hadn't cleaned them, hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. None of it mattered. He reached the top. The guards posted outside Maeron's private tower chamber didn't stop him. They looked away, rigid, as if the sight of him was somehow an insult to the walls they swore to protect. Evric bowed low before entering. The prince stood alone near the arched window, arms behind his back, posture a perfect silhouette against the charcoal sky. His armor had been stripped away, his sword hung idle, but the command in his stillness remained. Evric crossed the room, slow and deliberate, then dropped to his knees. "I await punishment, Your Highness," he said quietly. "There's no excuse for what occurred. I was compromised. I failed." Maeron didn't turn. Outside, a raven cawed and took flight, vanishing beyond the castle's edge. Evric lowered his forehead to the floor. His voice shook. "I beg to be stripped of title and duty, if that is your will, or executed, whichever brings less shame upon the crown." Silence. His heart beat so hard it bruised bone. Still, Maeron did not move. "I never meant for you to bear this burden," Evric said. "I never meant to disgust you." Something in the air shifted. Finally, Maeron turned. Evric did not raise his head. He felt the prince's presence draw near, slow, heavy-footed. He didn't flinch when a boot stopped inches from his cheek. "Is that truly what you believe?" Maeron asked, voice too calm. "I'm an Omega who lied about his designation and bore your child in secret," Evric whispered. "What else could I possibly be to you now but shame?" Maeron's silence was like a blade across the neck. No pain, just the cold before the drop. Then, "I told you to forget last night." Evric lifted his head, startled. His hair clung to his sweat-slick face, eyes glassy with sleep-deprived agony. "You said nothing happened," Maeron went on, eyes hard. "So let that be the truth." Evric blinked. Maeron's expression was unreadable. "You are my guard. You serve in that capacity until I say otherwise. That is all." Evric opened his mouth. "Say one word more," Maeron cut in, "and I will make it an order." Evric's throat closed around the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The prince turned and walked back toward the window. Evric remained kneeling, eyes hollow. He'd come hoping for punishment. What he got was worse. Erasure. He rose slowly, every joint screaming in protest, and bowed stiffly. "As you command, Highness." Then he left. He did not see Maeron's hand curl into a fist at the window ledge, nor the flicker of something dangerously close to fear in the prince's usually impenetrable gaze. The hours bled like open wounds. Evric returned to his quarters, where silence greeted him like a ghost. The cot was untouched, the basin dry. The small vial of suppressant that had betrayed him with its failure lay shattered in the corner, swept there in a moment of blind fury hours earlier. He didn't pick up the pieces. Instead, he collapsed on the floor and curled inward. He did not sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maeron's mouth against his. His hands. The way his breath had ragged with want before the coldness set in. Evric had wanted to hate it, but worse than that, he had wanted more. And that shame tasted like ash in his mouth. He pressed his wrist to his nose. The faint scent of his heat lingered, chemical and broken, like a trap half sprung. He scrubbed until it bled. Somewhere beyond the walls, bells tolled the morning watch. Maeron didn't sleep either. He sat in his study, alone save for the low flame in the hearth and the thousand voices screaming in his head. He had trained for war. He had been forged in courts where lies outnumbered truths and allies turned to corpses in a breath. But he had not been trained for this. Not for the moment Evric's body arched beneath his hands, trembling and needy and utterly not beta. Not for the scent that still haunted his every inhale. Not for the child he now realized had been his all along. He pressed the heel of his palm to his temple, trying to crush the memory out. He'd thought himself in control. He was in control. So why did he feel like the ground beneath his feet had turned to glass? A knock came at the door. He didn't answer. It opened anyway. "You look like shit," said a voice. Maeron didn't have to look up to recognize Commander Theris, his oldest friend and the only person still permitted to speak freely in his presence. "I'm not entertaining counsel today." "I'm not counsel," Theris said, crossing the room. "I'm telling you what the whole damn palace is whispering." Maeron's jaw twitched. "Speak plainly. There's talk. About your guard. About strange behavior. About sense." Maeron's eyes snapped to his. "And about Draven," Theris added more quietly. "He's returning." At dawn, Maeron stood so fast his chair scraped backward. Draven's been on the Eastern Front for months, and he's back with half a legion, no declaration of audience, and enough sharp-eyed spies to fill every blind corner of this keep. Maeron's fists clenched at his sides. "He knows," Theris said. Maeron's voice was low and flat. "Knows what? That you have something he wants." Silence fell between them. Theris's gaze softened. "Just barely. You've kept Evric close all these years. It was bound to draw attention eventually. He's my guard." "He's something else too," Theris said. "You just don't want to say it." Maeron turned toward the fire. His voice, when it came, was almost too quiet. "I can't afford to say it." By nightfall, the tower stood again in silence. But Maeron did not return to his chambers. He sat beneath the balustrade of the west wing instead, overlooking the gardens. The moon was high and full, a cruel mirror to the one that had seen them fall together the night before. Evric's heat had passed, but the ache hadn't. Maeron tilted his head back. Wind stirred the vines along the wall. Somewhere below, a guard shifted his spear, muttering to his partner. Everything normal, everything wrong. His fingers twitched. He didn't know what frightened him more, that Evric had lied for so long, or that Maeron had missed it, that the soldier he trusted more than his own blood had been crumbling in silence right in front of him. Or maybe what truly terrified him was that part of him didn't care about the lie. Part of him only remembered the feel of skin, the soft, broken sounds Evric made when no one else could hear. Maeron rose. He stared out across the kingdom he was meant to rule, and for the first time in years, he did not feel ready. Outside the palace walls, beneath the shadow of the southern gate, a figure on horseback dismounted and strode into torchlight. Draven. His armor gleamed silver, his wolf cloak trailing behind like a war banner. His eyes were colder than the steel at his hip. Behind him, dozens of his men filtered into the capital without challenge. He stared up at the highest tower, at the room where the prince now stood. A smile curved his mouth, sharp, dangerous, amused. "So," he murmured, "he does have a weakness after all." Chapter 14, Return of the Traitor. The council hall was colder than usual, though no one dared comment on it. A chill hung in the marbled chamber, not from the high arched windows that let in the pale autumn sun, but from the tension coiling between pillars and thrones, between glances and unspoken names. Nobles lined the benches in gold-threaded robes, perfumed and primed. Advisors stood behind them like shadows given form. At the front, seated on the obsidian dais, Prince Maeron wore his silence like a blade across the throat of the room. Then the doors opened. Heavy, grand, deliberate. Footsteps rang on stone. Draven walked into court as if it still belonged to him. Cloaked in wolf fur and steel, the former general moved with the arrogance of a man who'd tasted exile and decided it wasn't to his liking. Behind him, a modest escort of Eastern officers filed in, enough to make a statement, not enough to be treason. Barely. Maeron's gaze was motionless. "Lord Draven of Blackridge returns from the Eastern Front," the herald announced, almost reluctantly, "with tribute of conquered lands and recognition from the border barons." Draven bowed, not to Maeron, but to the room. "I bring spoils from the blooded sands of Valine," he said smoothly, his voice warm as silk on a knife's edge, "and assurances from our allies that the crown's reach remains feared and unchallenged." A few nobles murmured their approval. The older ones frowned but said nothing. Maeron's fingers tapped once against the carved arm of his seat. "You were dismissed without honors," he said flatly. "You disobeyed direct command and led a charge against sanctioned treaties." Draven didn't flinch. "And yet I returned with victory, not scandal." He turned to the watching council, offering a courteous incline of his head. "Of course, if my service is no longer desired." "You returned without request," Maeron cut in. "Not service, not summons, only presumption." The room stilled. Then, a soft laugh, like wine being poured, echoed from the left of the dais. Selene, the prince's consort, sat reclined on her carved throne, golden bangles chiming softly as she shifted. Her lips curved politely, but her eyes were sharp as glass. "Surely we are not so rigid," she said, voice honey-sweet. "To reject valor because it was premature." Several lords nodded. Draven's smile was subtle. "My lady honors me." Maeron's gaze flicked to her, unreadable. She looked away. Draven stepped closer to the central marble circle, pausing just before the edge where only the royals and their direct counsel might tread. "I hear," he said, tone idle, "that your highness has kept interesting company of late." The words dropped like blood in water. Evric wasn't in the chamber, but the air changed. Maeron said nothing. Draven glanced around with mock confusion. "Odd though. I thought the palace guard's Alpha Command required Beta-designated officers for the inner chambers. But I must have misunderstood. Perhaps the scent I caught near the Western Watch wasn't Beta at all." Whispers broke like brittle leaves in the corners of the hall. Maeron's hand stopped tapping. Draven shrugged. "It's a strange thing, scent. It lingers, marks territory even." A few nobles chuckled behind their sleeves. Selene's lashes lowered, a single knuckle pressed to her lips. But her eyes flicked to Maeron's. He rose. It was not a movement of anger, but of execution. Maeron didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Let me make this clear," he said, tone like ice over fire. "My personal guard's designation is not a matter for open mouths or idle gossip." His gaze swept the room, cold, unforgiving. "The next man who breathes his name without warrant will lose his tongue." Silence. Then, softly, "If rank does not muzzle your insolence, my blade will." A beat. Draven held his gaze, unblinking, then bowed. "Of course, Highness." The tension did not ease. It shifted. Selene stood. "This session is adjourned," she said before Maeron could. "Let our general present his records to the quartermaster and his tribute to the royal archives." A flurry of motion followed. Chairs scraped. Robes rustled. Nobody met the prince's eyes as they filed out. Draven lingered only a moment longer than needed, just long enough to smile again. Not at Maeron, at Selene. Then he turned and walked out, every step calculated, every echo deliberate. The Blackridge Manor hadn't been cleaned in weeks. Dust coated the corners of its lavish interior, though no webs dared form. Draven strode through the halls as though he'd never left, the old guards falling into step without needing instruction. In the inner sanctum, beneath the carved lion's crest, Vera waited. She stood in full priestess regalia, crimson robes, silver talismans, and the unmistakable scent of an old, forbidden rite. "You provoked him too early," she said without preamble. "I needed to see the cracks," Draven replied, unbothered. "And they're there." He poured himself wine, didn't offer her any. "Selene wavers," he continued. "The guard's scent lingers. And Maeron." He paused, swirling the cup. He looked frightened. For the first time in his charmed life, he's afraid. Vera stepped forward, her sharp eyes narrowing. "You don't fear him?" "I respect his blade," Draven said, "but not his heart." He drained the cup and set it aside. "He's only a man, and men break." Vera's fingers trailed over a ceremonial dagger on the table. "So do kingdoms." Draven smiled. "That's the plan." Chapter 15, The Poison Tongue. The den was carved deep into the bedrock beneath Blackridge's outer walls, a forgotten smuggler's tunnel repurposed by darker hands. Faint torchlights sputtered along the curved stone walls, casting erratic shadows over old bloodstains and claw marks. The air tasted of ash and damp iron. Draven stood at the center of the chamber, arms folded, his expression sharp with purpose. Across from him, the red-robed figure of Vera exhaled a slow, breathless hum as she circled the third presence, a younger man kneeling, head bowed, clad in crimson and black leather. The red Fong insignia gleamed faintly on his collar. "Do you understand what I ask of you?" Draven said softly, but the menace threaded into his tone made the room colder. The spy lifted his head, revealing sharp features and eyes a touch too pale to be natural. The scent of blood magic clung to him like perfume. "I do, my lord. The prince's guard. The one called Evric." Draven smiled thinly. "Not just a guard." He turned, stepping toward a crude table littered with maps, sent slick parchments, and coded reports from the palace. He picked up a folded piece of silk, charcoal gray, with a slash of silver embroidery, and let it unroll in his fingers. "He bears Maeron's mark." Vera stilled. The silence that followed was not surprise, but satisfaction, like watching a seed finally bloom. "Marked?" she echoed, voice smooth and low. Draven didn't look up. "I smelled it on him during the council. Weak, but present. Not a bond yet, but a claim. Something instinctual and foolish." "He allowed himself to be scented?" "No," Draven said. "He couldn't stop it. That's the point." He turned, meeting her gaze. "He's not Beta. He's Omega." The spy inhaled sharply, unable to disguise it. Vera's smile bloomed slowly. "So the little shadow Maeron keeps leashed is no hound, but prey." "Not just prey," Draven murmured. "An exposed throat." He moved toward the spy, tossing the embroidered scrap at his feet. "You will return to the palace gardens. Begin the whisper work. The right ears, the right moments. Subtle, too fast, and Maeron will suspect the source." "Yes, my lord. And if you find an opportunity," Vera added, trailing her fingers along the edge of a ceremonial blade resting on a side altar, "take something of him, a lock of hair, a drop of blood, even a soiled scrap of fabric. Anything to tether the scent." The spy nodded. "For the binding? For the breaking," she said sweetly. Draven stepped away, his voice cooler now, back to command. "He's not just leverage. He's the keystone. Maeron has ruled with a blade because no one's ever touched his heart. That guard, he's slipped through the cracks. The prince doesn't know how to guard that part of himself. And when the guard is gone?" the spy asked. "Maeron will crumble," Vera said. "He'll rage. He'll deny. But he'll bleed." Draven looked to the ceiling, stone and shadow, as if picturing it, how the throne room would shake, how Maeron's composure would fracture, how the court would shift under the weight of humiliation. "Maeron hides behind coldness," he said, "but cold breaks." Vera stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with ritual light. "And when he breaks, so does Fenris." A beat passed. Then Draven nodded to the spy. "Go." The man rose, bowed low, and slipped into the tunnel beyond, the torchlight swallowing him whole. The chamber fell into silence again. Draven stared after the man, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He could already see it. Evric, dragged from Maeron's side, perhaps even before the prince's eyes. No time to hide the scent. No time to pretend it was nothing. No time to bury it beneath duty and honor. Just truth. Ugly. Exposed. Unforgivable. He felt Vera watching him. "You hate him," she said. Draven's jaw twitched. "No. I love what he gave up. Power. Legacy. Me." She tilted her head. "But it's not about you anymore." No, he agreed. Now it's about the story, the legend, the prince who fell because he dared to love a ghost. Vera's laugh was soft and cold. Poetic, but not a myth, he murmured. Her eyes glittered. We make the myths. Draven's lips twitched. And we ruin them. The next morning, court resumed as usual. But something was different. A servant passing the garden hedge paused just a heartbeat longer when she caught sight of Evric's back. Too poised, too graceful for a beta. A nobleman idly sniffed the air near the barracks hallway, nose wrinkling as if catching a trace of something off. A scullery maid whispered to a guard on break that the prince's protector never took mates or shared bedding. How unnatural. By nightfall, a seamstress had asked if the palace was perhaps harboring an Omega under false pretense. By the next day, someone had written it in soap on the laundry wall. The prince's guard, what is he really? Evric didn't see it, but Maeron did. He erased it with his bare hand, lips pressed into a tight line. Behind him, the air tasted faintly of iron and wolves. Chapter 16, The Second Child. It began with a dull, pulsing ache low in Evric's spine. At first, he dismissed it. Another phantom pain from wounds long scarred over. Another ripple of the toxins that never quite left his blood. But by nightfall, it was unmistakable. His hands trembled as he clutched the basin, while slicking his throat. The scent, faint but rising, coated the room like mist. No, he'd been careful, devout with the suppressants, never missing a dose, never letting his body forget its silence. But it was failing him now, just as it had once before. By dawn, the palace physician stood over him, lips thinned to near invisibility, her hands pressed tight around a small glass vial. The liquid inside trembled with each tremor that ran through Evric's body. I warned you this strain might break under stress, she said, not unkindly. He closed his eyes. Maeron stood to the side, arms folded, a jagged silhouette against the tall, shrouded window of the bedchamber. He hadn't spoken since entering. His gaze was fixed on the floor, on the discarded cloths stained with Evric's blood. How far along? The prince asked at last, voice clipped. The physician hesitated. 3 weeks, perhaps 4. Options. A silence fell like frost. Evric lifted his head. His mouth opened, but no sound came. There are none, the healer finally said. The womb has already begun to restructure. Removing it now would kill him. Maeron's jaw clenched. Then make him comfortable. He won't survive this one, the healer added, quieter. His body's too damaged. Evric didn't cry then. He didn't scream. He simply nodded, as though he'd expected this. Because he had. They left him alone after that. Even Maeron. Especially Maeron. The weeks passed in blurs of pain and silence. Evric lay curled against the linen sheets, too weak to rise, too ashamed to look at anyone directly. Maids came and went like ghosts. One of them had been the one to change the sheets after he bled through them in the night. Another brought broth, untouched. He refused to speak. He'd thought nothing could shame him more than the first time. Then the frantic, bleeding nights in the outer camps. The tiny cries of a child he wasn't permitted to hold. But this second time was different. There was no war, no excuse, no distance between them now. Only truth, raw and stinking. He didn't weep until the 7th night. And once the tears began, they wouldn't stop. He turned his face to the pillow, sobbing so quietly that even the guards stationed beyond the door wouldn't hear. The scent of the child, his child, grew stronger each day. But there was no cradle, no celebration, only dread, only shame. When the labor began, it came like a storm, violent and unrelenting. The midwife screamed for more cloth. Another attendant slipped and fell in a pool of blood. Evric thrashed, breath caught in a terrible rhythm. every nerve alight with fire. Hold him down, he's tearing. I can't. Gods, he's burning up. Then came the scream. Not from Evric, but from the child. Then, alive. Evric collapsed back against the bed, too weak to lift his head. He didn't ask to hold the baby. He didn't dare. The room spun. He was so cold. A hand brushed his brow. Cool, firm. Maeron. Still breathing. The physician muttered in disbelief. How? He always survives, Maeron said, voice hoarse. Evric opened his eyes. Just barely. Maeron was holding the child. Not tenderly. Not cruelly. Just holding. The infant whimpered, bundled in silks far too fine. A head of dark hair. Small fists twitching. The child looked like him. Or maybe that was wishful thinking. Maeron stared down at the baby, unreadable. Then, quietly, "Send for the queen." Evric flinched. A sob hitched in his throat. "No," he whispered. "Please." Maeron's expression didn't change. "She will raise him," he said, "publicly, as a ward of the crown." Evric shook his head, barely able to lift it. "I'll stay out of sight. Never let anyone. Just let me. You'll rest. And forget." Evric's lips parted, but Maeron didn't wait for further words. He turned, handing the child to a waiting maid, who disappeared from the room in seconds. Gone. Like the first. Evric lay there, eyes burning, tears spilling freely down his temples. "I understand," he whispered hoarsely, the words barely forming. Maeron didn't reply. The door shut behind him like a blade. That night, Evric didn't sleep. He barely breathed. A faint spot of milk had soaked into the front of his bandages. His body, traitorous and aching, still reached for a child no longer within reach. He didn't weep again. His voice was gone, somewhere between shame and silence. At the edge of the redwood border, beneath the veil of fog and night, a messenger in dark leathers reached the edge of the encampment and knelt before a brazier. The priestess Vera accepted the rolled parchment with delicate hands. She read the mark, smiled. "So," she murmured. "He gave him another." Draven stepped from the shadows. "Two heirs, hidden," she continued, almost amused. "He is more wolf than he pretends." Draven said nothing, but his smile, like hers, was sharp as a knife, and full of promise. Chapter 17 The Dying Wolf. The scent of herbs had soaked into the stone. It clung to the walls, the sheets, the folds of Evric's robes, though he barely wore more than a linen wrap these days, too fevered and thin for proper garments. The royal infirmary was silent except for the low crackle of oil lamps and the soft rasp of his breath, uneven and shallow. He hadn't opened his eyes since dawn. The window was cracked open, letting in autumn wind, sharp as teeth. Maeron sat beside the bed, not like a prince, not like a lover, not like anything but a man hollowed out by silence. His gloves lay folded on the small table. One hand rested on his knee, the other held a damp cloth, forgotten, half-dried. Evric didn't move, hadn't moved in hours. A physician had said earlier, "The damage is internal. The fever won't break. The body is rejecting itself." Maeron had dismissed the woman with a flick of his hand, not because she was wrong, but because she was right, and he couldn't bear the sound of her voice when she said it. The cloth, when pressed to Evric's temple again, met skin hot and clammy. His face had grown sharp, sunken. A bruise lingered on his wrist from where a healer's strap had held him still during a seizure 2 nights ago. The child had been delivered, alive. Maeron had held him, had passed him to Celine, and Evric had almost died. "Evric," Maeron said, barely above a breath. No reply, not even a flicker. He drew back, fingers curling into a fist on his knee. The cloth fell to the floor, silent as snow. Then, at last, a whisper. "I heard you." Maeron's gaze snapped up. Evric hadn't opened his eyes, but his mouth had moved. "I thought you were asleep," Maeron said stiffly. Evric didn't smile. "I thought I was dead." Maeron looked away. There was nothing princely in him now. His robes were creased, his hair unbraided. He hadn't left the infirmary in 2 nights. Rumors no doubt brewed through the halls, but he hadn't cared. "I had a sword," Evric murmured. "Do you remember?" Maeron turned to him. Evric's fingers twitched, as if remembering the hilt. "Polished it every night. Swore I'd die with it in hand." Maeron said nothing. "I can't lift it now," Evric continued, voice trembling. "I tried. The weight split my side. The stitches tore. You shouldn't have tried. I shouldn't have survived." Maeron's jaw tensed. Evric let the silence linger. Let it wound. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I'm no use to you like this." Maeron closed his eyes. It was like being stabbed. Not in the chest, but somewhere deeper, somewhere words couldn't reach. "I swore to serve," Evric said. "To protect you." "You did," Maeron rasped. "You have. But now," Evric's voice cracked. "What am I now, your highness? A broken sheath? A whimpering wretch bleeding on your floors? I can't even scent properly. He swallowed. "I'm nothing." Maeron stood so suddenly the stool scraped. He paced to the window, gripped the sill. The wind poured in, sharp and bracing, but he didn't feel it. Behind him, Evric's breathing faltered. "You told me to forget," Evric whispered. "After the first time. After the second." Maeron's shoulders stiffened. "I tried," Evric said. "I did. But my body won't forget. It won't let me. Not the scent. Not the pain. Not the heat." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Maeron turned. His steps were slow as he crossed the room, but he knelt beside the bed, hand reaching again for the cloth. He soaked it, wrung it, pressed it to Evric's chest with agonizing care. Evric flinched. "Don't," he whispered. Maeron didn't move. Evric turned his face away. "If you're going to pity me, leave." "It's not pity," Maeron said. Evric gave a short, broken laugh. "Then what is it?" Maeron said nothing. He couldn't answer, couldn't even look him in the eye. "I loved you," Evric murmured. Maeron's head snapped up. Still, Evric didn't look at him. "Before I knew what it meant. Before the first rut. Before the mark. I loved you when I thought I was just a sword in your hand. And even then I wanted more. I was weak." "No," Maeron said. "Yes." Evric's eyes opened at last, dark and wet with fever. "And you used that weakness. You hid me, claimed me. You put your child in me, then gave him away. Twice." Maeron flinched. "I don't want your regret," Evric said. Maeron stood slowly. "I don't regret you." Evric didn't blink. "Then why can't you look at me without shame?" There was a long, taut pause. Maeron's hands curled at his sides. "Because I should have done better." Evric's eyes closed again. "But you didn't." "No," Maeron said. "I didn't." The quiet afterward was suffocating. Maeron sat again, this time not on the stool, but on the edge of the bed. The weight dipped the mattress. Evric didn't move. "I can't change what's been done," Maeron said at last. Evric gave no reply. "But you are not nothing," Maeron continued. "You never were. I'm dying." Maeron's voice cracked. "Then I'll sit here while you do. Until you don't." Evric turned his head toward him. Their faces were close now, too close. Maeron could smell the bitter tang of illness, the sweat clinging to his collarbone, the faintest hint of blood. And beneath it all, him. Still him. Evric's lips trembled. You still won't say it. Maeron didn't breathe. Say it, Evric whispered. If you want me to live. If you mean any of this. Maeron looked into his eyes and said nothing. Evric turned away. That was the last word between them that night. Outside the infirmary walls, shadows stirred beneath the lamplight. A figure crouched at the window edge, hidden by the folds of an acolyte's cloak. He did not breathe too deeply, did not flinch at the cold. He watched. He listened. When the prince rose at dawn to take fresh water from the attending handmaiden, the spy was gone, vanished down the eastern corridor, vanishing through servant tunnels and hidden stairs. The report would be in Vera's hands before the sun had fully risen. The prince had stayed the night. The prince had spoken softly to the dying wolf. And the wolf, gods help them, had spoken back. Chapter 18, Shadows at the Gate. The bells rang at dawn. Not the melodic chime of ceremony, but a sharp, jarring clang that broke across the frost-silver rooftops of the outer city like a blade. It stirred crows from the rafters. It startled merchants halfway through tying their morning bundles. It summoned the palace guard from their sleep, boots thudding over marble halls. And it jolted Evric upright in his infirmary bed, breath slicing through his lungs like glass. The world spun. He clutched the frame, fingers barely strong enough to hold. The fever hadn't left him. It clung like wet linen, dragging every movement through the weight of pain. He could still taste the bitter residue of the herbs on his tongue. Shouting, steel, screams. They weren't inside. Not yet. The outer gate. Evric tried to rise. A handmaiden rushed to stop him. My lord, you mustn't. He pushed her away with more force than he thought he had. Open the window, he rasped. Now. She hesitated. A sound outside the infirmary wall answered for her. One that required no interpretation. The distinct, wet crack of a sword finding flesh. She screamed. Evric stumbled to the casement, dragging himself upright. Outside, the garden trees swayed gently beneath a pale morning sun. But beyond the iron gates at the city wall, he saw them, red-marked cloaks, wolf leathers soaked in mud and old blood, eyes rimmed with war paint, red fang. Evric's blood ran cold. They weren't an army, no banners, no siege, but they didn't need to be. A small, fast unit trained for capture, not conquest. They'd come with purpose, and he knew their purpose. They'd come for him. He turned, dragging on the nearest robe he could reach, blood-stained and too large. The infirmary side corridor led to a guard post. Or it used to. His vision blurred. He could barely keep upright. He passed a mirrored panel and barely recognized the gaunt, hollow-eyed figure that staggered past it. The moment he stepped into the outer hall, a sword clanged against the threshold behind him. They were already inside. Evric ran, or tried to. His body screamed in protest, lungs twisting with each breath. His stitches pulled beneath the robe. Blood seeped anew from his side. He tasted iron. Footsteps pounded after him. Down the stairs. Through the servants' tunnel. He barely made it to the outer courtyard before a shadow lunged from the stone pillar, slamming him to the ground. He choked on the impact. A red fang warrior loomed above, features obscured by a bone-painted mask. His hands wrapped around Evric's collar, lifting him, and something cold pressed to his neck. Blade. But before it could sink in, a palace guard slammed into the attacker from the side. Shield first. Evric collapsed again, limbs splayed over cobblestone. Fighting exploded around him. Steel screamed. The air filled with the sound of wolves in human form, howls of fury, the crack of bones, the bark of command. Red fangs surged from alleyways and tunnel mouths, overwhelming the outer gate. The palace guard, though fewer, fought like cornered beasts. Evric crawled. His vision blurred again. Blood dripped from his fingers. Someone shouted his name. Another blade caught his shoulder. He screamed, collapsing beside a fallen guard. The world spun, grew distant, muffled. Then, like thunder splitting the sky, a roar tore through the chaos. Not animal. Alpha. The ground shook beneath charging hooves. Not horses. Wolves. The royal cavalry had arrived. Maeron rode at their head. He wasn't dressed in gold or fur today, only black leathers and a crimson crest across his breast, eyes blazing with a fury that belonged to old kings and gods of wrath. His sword flashed like lightning, tearing through red-fang warriors as if their bones were made of paper. He dismounted mid-charge. Evric saw him land, roll, rise into a brutal arc of motion, sword slicing clean through the first two that lunged toward him. Maeron didn't pause. He cut his way forward like a man possessed. "Where is he?" he roared. "Evric." Evric tried to answer. His lips moved. No sound came. Another red fang lunged from the side. Maeron turned just in time, parrying the blow and driving his blade through the man's throat with a savage twist. Blood sprayed the ground. Finally, Maeron reached him. Evric collapsed against him. Maeron caught him in his arms, one hand under his back, the other at his nape. For a moment their eyes met. Evric's vision blurred with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Maeron stared down at him, chest heaving, eyes burning. "I dragged them here," Evric choked out. I weakened your wall. Stop. I'm not even whole anymore. Maeron leaned down. "If you say one more word," he growled, voice low and trembling, "I'll throttle you myself." Evric laughed weakly, coughed. Blood stained his lips. Maeron lifted him fully, cradling him against his chest. His scent, ash, frost, blood, surrounded Evric like a shroud. He didn't care if he died there. He didn't, but something else did. A horn sounded from the western watchtower. Red Fang retreat. A flare burst in the sky, signal fire, crimson and orange, and the attackers began pulling back. Some were dragged. Others were forced to fall behind as the palace guard rallied and drove them out with fresh blades. Maeron watched, eyes narrowed. Then he looked down, and his arms were empty. Evric was gone. He didn't know when the body had slipped from his grasp. Only that the scent had vanished. Only that blood slicked his hands, and the space where Evric had lain was cold. Someone screamed. One of the guards stumbled toward him. They had shadowcasters, my lord. They vanished, took him. Maeron didn't speak, didn't blink. He stared at his hands, red to the wrist. The scent of Evric lingered faintly in the air, and then it was gone. Chapter 19, Blood Oath. The throne hall was heavy with silence, thick and stifling, like the calm before a storm that would never pass. Maeron sat motionless on the high seat, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. His gauntlets dripped rainwater onto the marble floor, black cloak soaked through from riding through the night. The storm outside still thundered against the palace walls, but the chill that filled the chamber came from within. Evric was gone, and they were debating. The Queen Dowager stood at the foot of the dais, her voice low and measured, though every syllable dripped with steel. "We mourn the loss, of course, but your highness must consider what remains. The boy was valuable to you, no one denies that, but he was also dangerous. His presence divided loyalties. And now, say his name." Maeron's voice cracked through the hall. The Queen Dowager blinked. "Say his name," Maeron repeated, rising from the throne like a drawn blade. She did not flinch. "Evric." Maeron descended the steps slowly. "Not the boy. Not the traitor. Evric Thornefell. My guard. My sword. He faltered, just for a breath, then went on, quieter but sharper. "My oath bound. Gasps rippled through the nobles. That name, the chancellor said carefully, has become a liability. A stolen liability, barked Maeron. Taken from my walls by the same red-fang bastards who sent assassins into our barracks and poison into our cups. What do you think they'll do to him now? Offer him shelter? Honor? No. They'll use him, break him, parade him through their filth-ridden camps until nothing is left of his body or his mind. No one dared to speak. The Queen Dowager stepped forward again. Even so, your enemies want you angry, impulsive, to bait you into war on a single pawn. He is not a pawn. The shout shattered the silence, echoed across pillars. A noble at the far end flinched visibly. Maeron's eyes swept the gathered faces. Lords in furred cloaks, advisors clutching scrolls, generals with their hands behind their backs like statues carved in cowardice. Do you think me weak? He asked softly. Because I feel rage when one of my own is taken? Because I do not smile through treachery? No one answered. He moved down the hall like a predator, boots clicking over the marble, voice low and cold and royal. You say Evric was dangerous. You feared him, a guard too close, too quiet, too obedient. But none of you ever asked why. He stopped in front of the chancellor. Do you know how many times he was whipped for me? The man paled. How many lashes he took to protect secrets you dare not name. How many missions he returned from bleeding, gasping, only to kneel again before me like a dog too loyal to die. Still silence. Maeron turned to the court at large. And now you want me to leave him behind, to call him a mistake, to let Red Fang use his body as a message to me? He drew his sword. The gesture was not slow, not dramatic, just final. The blade scraped free, gleaming silver under the torchlight. I will carve that message into every throat from here to the wastes before I let them keep him. Whispers broke out. A few nobles backed away. Someone, young Lord Velric, made the mistake of speaking. This is madness, he blurted. The North is unstable. A campaign would take months, and for what? A disgraced Omega? Is he worth? Maeron was in front of him before he could finish. The sword's tip pressed just beneath the boy's chin. Say it again, Maeron said very quietly. Velric swallowed. I say the word. Omega. Like it shames him. Like it makes him yours to judge. I didn't mean. Maeron sheathed his sword with a sharp hiss. Evric is not your concern. He is mine. And should I find a mark on him, should I return to ash and ruin, I will not blame Red Fang alone. He strode back to the throne, cloak flaring behind him. I go north. Alone? Someone asked weakly. Maeron turned. With blade. With fire. With whatever gods remain. The Queen Dowager's voice trembled for the first time. You will abandon the court for a single soldier? He did not look at her. I will burn the court to retrieve my soldier. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't need it. The guards flanked him the moment he stepped from the dais. Servants scrambled ahead. Aides ran to summon the blacksmiths, the warhorses, the commanders still loyal to Maeron's banner. The storm outside swelled as if the gods themselves stirred. At the stables, he paused just long enough to let them buckle on his armor. He wore no sigils, only blackened steel, bracers etched with wolf's teeth, and a long cloak dark as morning. A young page rushed to him with a scroll of battle orders. Later, Maeron said, my lord, your generals, will march when I say. The horse they brought was wild-blooded and untamed. It reared at the thunder, hoofs kicking, but Maeron mounted in one movement and bent its will like he had bent empires. He looked once toward the distant mountains, where Red Fang banners fluttered in defiance. Let them try, he whispered, and then louder to the court now gathered behind him at the palace gates. When I return with him, and I will, You will never speak his name again in scorn. He didn't wait for applause or for protest. He turned the beast toward the gates. As he rode out into the storm, his last words cut through the wind like prophecy. Pray I do not arrive too late. Chapter 20. Into the darkness. The wind screamed over the northern wasteland, an endless expanse of stone, ash, and bone. It peeled the flesh from lips and souls alike, as if trying to strip away any last warmth the world still clung to. Maeron rode at the head of his vanguard, cloak whipping behind him like a banner of mourning. They had not rested in 2 days. The horses stumbled, soldiers wrapped themselves in whatever scraps of fur and salt-soaked cloth they could find, but no one dared complain. Maeron's silence was punishment enough. He didn't eat, barely drank. He rode as if the storm was behind him, not ahead, as if something in his chest would break open if he so much as paused to breathe. The last town had been left burning behind them, its outposts loyal to Redfang. He hadn't given the order to spare a single spy. Now there was only rock, ice, and the smell of wolves. 3 miles until the pass, muttered Captain Solon beside him. The ridge will shelter us by nightfall. Maeron said nothing. The captain hesitated. Sire, the men need fire. The frost bites deeper here. Some of the horses. Let them burn what they must, Maeron said coldly. But we march again before moonrise. He kicked his horse forward. By the time they reached the makeshift encampment, a splatter of tents across dead earth, Maeron's gloves were frozen stiff with blood not his own. He tore them off, threw open the flap of his war tent, and stepped inside without a word. Silence. Finally. No eyes to read his face. No whispers behind hands about what Evric had meant to him. No guards wondering why their prince had abandoned counsel, comfort, and crown to chase one shadow into the teeth of enemy lands. He dropped his sword onto the table, hands trembling. Not from cold, from absence. He looked down at the map, though he didn't see it. His voice was barely audible. He never asked for anything. The tent offered no reply. Not food, not recognition, not even safety. Just, he swallowed hard. To stay. There was a pause. Then, and I made him kneel. The words landed like stones in water, rippling with shame. Maeron's hand reached slowly for the edge of the table. His fingers curled over it, knuckles bone white, as if the fabric beneath them was the only thing keeping him grounded. If he is gone, he whispered, I will be the one who chose it. Outside, the wind howled again, shrill and bitter. He sat. In the cold hush of the tent, Maeron bent his head, eyes closing. If he's dead, he said softly, I truly have no one. A breath, ragged. I should have said it. Another gust rattled the canvas. I should have said it. Somewhere, in the blackness of the wasteland, a thin sliver of red rose above the horizon. The blood moon. Far away. So far away it could have been a dream. Evric opened his eyes. His breath rattled. Chains clinked faintly where his wrists were bound above him, stretched taut from the altar's edge. His body hung limp, shoulders twisted unnaturally, bare feet scraping cold stone. His chest moved in shallow, painful increments, and his lips, chapped and cracked, shaped silent words long before sound followed. Maeron. No answer. Only the echo of his own voice against cavernous rock. He could smell iron, smoke, the bitter herbs of old magic. The red light above wasn't flame. It was the blood moon filtering through a high, jagged crack in the ceiling, painting the entire sacrificial chamber in rust. Evric's head lolled weakly to the side. His abdomen throbbed with hollow pain. His thighs trembled. His mate Mark, hidden beneath bloodied skin, burned like it was being carved anew. He wasn't sure how many days had passed since the raid. Sometimes he heard voices. Sometimes he saw the priestess. Her laugh rang through the dark like a blade, cold, cutting. "You were always meant to bleed for him," she'd said. "And now he will watch you do it." He had begged her to kill him. She had laughed. "Not yet, little wolf," she'd whispered into his ear. "Not until he comes. And oh, he will come. You'll see. He always comes too late." Evric swallowed hard. "Don't," he breathed. "Please don't come." He shifted. The chains bit deeper into his wrists. A sob escaped, unbidden. "Please, Maeron, not for me. Not anymore." His voice cracked, broken as his body. He remembered warmth. A hand on his shoulder after the last mission. A silence too intimate to be duty. The way Maeron had once, only once, paused beside him before sleep, looking like he might say something that could change everything. But he hadn't, and now it was too late. "I'm tired," Evric whispered to the dark. "So tired." He closed his eyes again. Outside the altar, across the barren ridges, red fong torches flickered, watch posts on the edge of shadow. The sentries paced like wolves behind bone fences, spears tipped with poison. And still Maeron rode, through ash storms, through fire-scarred cliffs, through snow that felt like knives against bare skin. He did not stop for pain. He did not speak of fear. Each night, the blood moon hung heavier in the sky. Each night, he dreamed of Evric whispering, "Don't come," and woke with the sheets soaked in sweat, heart roaring in his throat. On the fifth night, his vanguard spotted the Red Fong perimeter. They camped in a cave above the valley's mouth, overlooking the path to the altar. Captain Solon approached. "Highness, the scouts confirm movement below. Ritual fires. Guard patrols. They're expecting us." "Good," Maeron said. Solon hesitated. "They'll fight to the death." Maeron turned toward the path, eyes glinting crimson in the firelight. "So will I." Behind them, the blood moon rose higher, like a curse writ in the heavens. Far below, in the heart of stone, Priestess Vera watched the flames dance across Evric's bruised form. Her lips curled. "Let him come," she murmured. "I want him to see what remains of his little shadow." She raised her arms. The flames roared, and the final preparations for the blood rite began. Chapter 21. The Altar of Surrender. Evric didn't know where the pain ended and the shame began. The stone was cold beneath his spine, rough against the raw welts lacing his back. The blood moon altar had no softness, no forgiveness, only ritual, only purpose. And he was that purpose now. He hung upright against the stone pillar, arms spread, wrists bound in iron cuffs etched with runes that bit into skin and soul alike. His legs were shackled, too, spaced just wide enough to render modesty a forgotten concept. Every inch of him exposed, trembling, undone. The red light of the rising blood moon filtered in through the fractured ceiling of the underground sanctum, casting the scene in lurid hues. Shadows danced like phantoms on the walls, flickering with the flames of the surrounding braziers. The altar rose at the center like a throne for the damned, and the priestess Vera stood before it, wrapped in robes of crimson and bone. Her lips curled into a smile that tasted of cruelty and old gods. "I warned you," she said gently, tracing a finger up Evric's bare chest, "that resisting would only prolong the agony." He flinched under her touch. "Still pretending to be noble, are you?" she whispered. "Still pretending your blood is your own?" He didn't answer. His throat was dry, his eyes swollen from days without sleep. His skin burned, not from fire, but from the heat building beneath it, the itch crawling through his blood like 1,000 claws. The drug she'd used to suppress him was gone now. She had bled it from him, bled it with knives, with chance, with bitter steam he'd been forced to breathe until his vision swam. Now every breath was agony. His glands, long dormant, long suppressed, ached beneath the surface. The scent he'd kept buried for years stirred like smoke under skin, thick and sharp, a secret ripped out of him by force. He bit his tongue so hard it bled. "Let it go," Vera coaxed, her voice as soft as silk against a blade. "You were never meant to cage it. That heat, this scent, it is your nature, Evric Thornefell. It is your gift to him." She leaned closer, her breath brushing the shell of his ear. "And tonight, it will call him here." "No," Evric rasped. "No, please." Vera's smile widened. She stepped back and raised her arms. Around them, red-fang acolytes chanted in low, guttural tones, their voices merging into a pulse that matched the throb in his head. The brazier flames flared, responding to her will, casting halos of red light around the runic circle etched into the floor. "He is bound to you," she declared, "and you so desperately bound to him." Evric trembled. It was building again, that unbearable pressure. The sweat dripping down his temples wasn't just from heat. It was the scent blooming, wild and wrong and ripe, crawling into the air like a secret loosed. "No!" He tried to fight it, clenched his fists so tightly the nails bit into his palms. Blood slicked his skin. His body betrayed him anyway. His thighs twitched. His back arched against the stone, involuntary. A sound caught in his throat, half gasp, half sob. Vera watched him with delighted detachment. "This is what you feared," she murmured, "that he might see you like this, weak, wanting, aching to be touched. And yet, how beautifully you break." "Stop," Evric choked. "You will call him," she said, "whether you want to or not." "I won't," he whispered, tears spilling past the corners of his eyes. "He mustn't come. He can't see me like this." She circled him slowly, each step deliberate, each word a lash. "Oh, but that's the beauty of it," she purred. "He will come, because he is your alpha, your mate, because his instincts will drag him through fire and ruin just to reach the one who belongs to him." She paused, her hand lifting to rest just below the hollow of his throat. "And when he does," she said softly, "he will see what you've become, what I've made of you." Evric trembled harder. He could feel it now, his own scent blooming, thick and cloying in the torchlit air. Pheromones, unchecked. A pull only he would recognize. His head thudded back against the stone. "Maeron," he breathed, barely a whisper. Don't come." The runes beneath him shimmered. The chanting rose. Vera lifted her hands high and turned to the heavens, her voice ringing like a bell of blood. "Let the bond be summoned under moon's red eye. Let the alpha be drawn to the scent that bears his mark. Let him kneel before the ruin of his oath." The braziers roared. Evric screamed. His body arched, every nerve flayed open by the force of the ritual. In the distance, impossibly far, yet horribly near, the blood moon reached its apex. Vera turned back to him, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "He's coming," she said. Evric shook his head, still shaking, still broken. No, he can't." But her smile deepened. "He will. He must. You've called him." Her voice dropped to a purr. "And now, he will come see what his Omega has become." Evric whimpered. He could already feel it, like a string pulled taut through his soul. Presence approaching. The bond he'd buried burning through the dark, answering the call he hadn't meant to make. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he prayed he would die before Maeron arrived. Chapter 22, The Echo of Weakness. Snow fell like sifted ash over the northern gorge, thickening the silence into something too weighty for words. The wind had no voice, only teeth. It dragged across the armor of Maeron's soldiers, moaned through the broken pines, and whispered secrets that no man dared name aloud. Maeron sat astride his warhorse, still as the blades strapped to his back. The wolf's head sigil on his cloak snapped in the gale, yet he did not flinch. Before him, the charred ruins of the Red Fang's outer watchpost smoldered, reduced to blackened timber and blood-stained snow. No survivors, no trail. Only a single item had been left in the center of the carnage, laid atop a slab of redstone like an offering. Evric's crest, bent, burnt, but unmistakably his. Ren dismounted behind him, crunching through the frost with the caution of a man who'd learned not to speak unless he had to. He knelt, lifting the sigil between two fingers. A thread of blood clung to it like wax. Maeron didn't move. "He was here," Ren said, his voice grim. "Not long ago." "I know." Maeron's voice came low, ragged, dragged from somewhere beneath his ribs. Ren hesitated. "They want you to believe he's already gone. They want me to believe he's broken," Maeron interrupted coldly. "But they underestimate him." Ren rose. "What do you want done?" Maeron's gaze fixed on the distant ridge, where blood had been smeared in deliberate symbols. Old war sigils, Red Fang glyphs for conquest, sacrifice, and shame. His hands tightened on the reins, leather creaking. "Dig no graves," he said. "Leave no markers. Salt the earth if you must, but we press forward." Ren saluted and turned to give the order. Maeron dismounted only once he was alone. The gorge stretched out before him, a jagged scar in the world's flesh, veiled in snow and shadows. But beneath the silence pulsed something deeper, darker. A tether drawn taut, a breath not his own. Pain struck without warning. He staggered, one knee hitting the ground as a wave of heat, not his, rushed through his veins. For a moment he couldn't see, could only feel it. The scent of fear and fire, the crack of skin split by strain, the phantom grip of shackles. "Evric." Maeron gritted his teeth, dragging himself upright by sheer force of will. This was more than just the echo of the bond. It was invasion, a scream buried so deep it shook the marrow. He felt it in the small of his back, in the hollow between his shoulder blades, where his mark might have been, had he ever taken what was his. He turned away from the camp. The snow grew thicker as he walked, unmuffled by his armor, unbothered by the raw wind. The farther he moved from the fires, the more the wilderness reclaimed him. Trees rose like skeletal sentinels. The ice cracked underfoot like bones. He didn't stop until the world was quiet again. Just him, and the ache. He looked up at the red haze spreading across the night sky, where the blood moon bled through the cloud cover. Then he whispered, "He's afraid of me." His own voice startled him. The wind carried it nowhere. It simply vanished, swallowed by the dark. He looked down, fingers tightening around his gloves. "He thinks I'll see him as ruined." A pause. "That if I find him like this, I'll turn away." His throat worked. "Fool." Another gust of wind swept through, stinging his eyes. Maeron's voice dropped to a growl. "I should have known he would run to the end of the world before letting himself be touched like that. Even in chains, he's too proud to call it suffering. He calls it shame." His pulse thundered beneath his skin. Why didn't I take him away from all this when I had the chance? He wasn't speaking to the wind anymore. He was speaking to the ghost tethered to his chest, the one that writhed with each step closer, the one that screamed whenever he hesitated, the one that smelled of blood and winter and the last thing he'd ever wanted to need. "I should have taken him," he murmured. "Before they did." A long silence followed. Maeron bowed his head. Then, very softly, "You can fear me all you want, Evric. I won't stop." He turned back toward the camp, where banners whipped in the snow and wolves howled into the rising wind. He would not falter now, even if the bond bled, even if Evric's scent had turned to sorrow. Especially then. Hours passed before they saw movement across the ridge. A scout galloped through the gorge, his wolf mount panting and streaked with frost. He slid to a halt before Ren and Maeron just as dawn cracked the blood-hazed horizon. Sighting at the blood moon altar, the scout barked, bowing from his saddle. Their king, Karath, has taken the stage. Maeron's head snapped up. What did he say? The scout swallowed. He announced that tonight's sacrifice will be the shame of Fenris. The silence that followed was absolute. Maeron stepped forward. Ren moved to stop him but froze when he saw the look in the prince's eyes. You know what he means, Maeron said, voice low and lethal. Ren nodded once. He means your guard. No, Maeron said, drawing his blade in a single, fluid motion. The steel caught firelight and shadow both. He means my mate. Chapter 23, The Broken Mask. The altar pulsed with a dull, living heat beneath Evric's spine. Stone etched with ancient runes dug into his skin where his tunic had been torn away. Shackles bit into his wrists and ankles, spread wide, holding him up like some grotesque offering. The air stank of burnt pine, iron, and something more ancient, waiting, watching. He couldn't move, could barely think. The drug had long since worn off, but the hollowness it left behind was worse than the numbness. His body trembled with the aftershocks of suppressed instinct, feral scent spiraling outward in involuntary waves. The more he fought to suppress it, the more it leaked, his shame, his secret, his body's betrayal. All around him, the red fangs gathered, masked in war paint and crimson pelts. They beat drums made of stretched hide, howling with rhythmic frenzy. The blood moon bled high and wide in the night sky, bathing the snow in shades of rust. Vera stood behind him on the altar steps, her hands wet with the oils of invocation, fingers brushing the hollow of his throat like a priestess consecrating a sacrifice. Her voice coiled low and sweet. He's nearly ready, Karath. The Red Fang King stepped forward. Unlike the rest, he wore no mask. His silver beard was knotted into braids, and across his bare chest ran the twin brands of the warlord's oath, burned in with iron and salt. His eyes gleamed like shattered garnet. He looked at Evric not with lust nor cruelty, but with the cold reverence one gives a weapon to be shattered before the crowd. No more waiting, Karath said. The people want to see what the kingdom hides. Evric's head lolled forward. His lips were cracked, the taste of blood dry and metallic on his tongue. He barely registered the movement until fingers closed around the edge of the collar around his neck, the last piece of concealment he still wore. A final line between what he was and what they wanted. No, Evric rasped, voice ruined. Don't. But the word was drowned by a roar as Karath yanked. The iron collar snapped free with a sound like breaking bone. The effect was immediate. Evric's body jerked, then convulsed. Scent exploded from him like smoke from a pyre. Sweet, aching heat, tangled with the bitter shame of exposure, of submission. And Omega's release, raw, unrestrained, and utterly unprotected. The Red Fangs roared their approval, some throwing back their heads to howl, others pounding weapons into the snow. There it is, Vera breathed with triumph. The shame of the wolves, the fallen sword, the unmarked bride. No, Evric whispered again, but it was lost. The wind carried his scent down the ridges, over the gorge, across the scarred wilderness. His mask was gone, his disguise shattered, his greatest humiliation not in being chained or beaten, but in being seen. Look at him, Karath shouted to the crowd. This is what the White Crown calls loyalty. A mutt with no scent line, bred to be a soldier, broken to be a slave. The chanting surged. Shame of Fenris! Shame of Fenris! Evric gasped as heat flared again beneath his skin, rising against his will, tearing through the fragile walls he'd built to survive. Everything he'd hidden, for years, for decades, now spilled like blood into the snow. They'd stripped him clean, not just of clothing, but of dignity, of self. His hands clenched into fists so tight his nails tore flesh. His back arched in agony as another ripple of instinct passed through him, salt-hot and humiliating, and this time he couldn't bite back the moan. Tears burned down the sides of his face. "Maeron, don't come. Please, don't see me like this." The chanting rose, a fevered storm of sound. Korath raised his axe above the crowd. "Tonight, let this creature be unmade before your eyes." Evric's heart pounded in his ears. His vision blurred. The cold had long since abandoned him. He burned from within, scorched by the scent pouring off his skin. The sound of drums grew distant. His body sagged against the restraints. And then, a sound unlike the rest cracked across the air. A howl. Not from the Red Fangs. Something sharper. Angrier. Wrong. Evric blinked, sluggish and dazed. Another sound followed, hoofbeats. Fast. Singular. Deafening. Someone screamed. The crowd broke. A white horse surged over the ridge, hoofs tearing into snow, wolf-barred armor gleaming like moonlight on steel. A rider crouched low over the saddle, cloak billowing, sword drawn. "Maeron." Evric's breath hitched. His last coherent thought before darkness took him was not shame, or fear, or humiliation. It was hope. He came. Chapter 24, Wrath of the Alpha. The wind screamed over the ridges, snapping the blood-stained banners of the Red Fangs. All around the blood moon altar, the air burned with the stench of scorched pine, spilled iron, and something deeper, an undercurrent of dread that silenced even the howls of the wild. Maeron stood in the heart of the enemy camp like the eye of a storm. His white stallion reared beneath him, blood streaking its flanks, mane matted from the charge through the ravine. The sword in his hand dripped red, not from Evric's captors alone, but from any who had dared bar his path. A dozen dead lay in a broken arc behind him, their cries still echoing through the rocks. "Touch him again," Maeron snarled, voice ragged with fury, "and I will rip the skin from your bones." No one moved. The Red Fang warriors, brutes who had painted their mouths with ash and sharpened their teeth to points, staggered back like children before a wildfire. Even the drums faltered. The chanting died. Korath stepped forward, his massive form looming in front of the altar. "He is an Omega," the warlord said with scorn. "A stain. You would spill royal blood for this." Maeron dismounted. The motion was slow, controlled. He dropped from the saddle like a descending star, the silver of his blade catching the moonlight as it rose again in his hand. His cloak fell away. His eyes glowed, not amber, not gold, but red, burning red. "I told you once," he said. "If you hurt him, I would burn your name from the earth." His voice cracked with something older than threat. It was promise, oath. Then he moved. The shift wasn't human. One heartbeat he stood still, the next he was in the Red Fangs. His blade sang through armor and bone alike, a blur of steel and wrath and unstoppable, deliberate violence. They didn't stand a chance. Not against a full-blooded alpha in rage. Not against him. He was fire incarnate, carving a path through the enemy ranks with methodical savagery. Not one of them could hold him. He struck with precision, throat, heart, spine, like a creature that had studied the shape of pain and now made art of it. When a spear came at his side, he didn't parry. He caught it mid-air, snapped it in two with his bare hands, and drove the jagged end into the attacker's face. Blood sprayed across his armor, already slick. Another charged him with a war axe. Maeron let him close, too close, and then snapped the warrior's neck with a twist of his wrist, never breaking stride. "Where is Vera?" he growled as he walked, sword dragging along the stones. "Where is your witch?" She appeared atop the altar stairs, face flushed, trembling, eyes wide. "Stop," she hissed. "The ritual." He hurled his blade at her. It struck the stone beside her head with a shriek of steel, cracking the altar's edge. Vera flinched. Maeron was already moving again, shoving through the last line of guards who dared stand between him and the altar. Karath roared, rushing to intercept. His axe gleamed like thunder in his hands. Steel clashed against steel. Maeron caught the swing, shoved it wide, and delivered 3 rapid strikes, shoulder, thigh, knee. Karath stumbled, blood pouring. "You are no king," Maeron spat. "Only a butcher dressing up his hunger in prophecy." Karath growled. "He's filth. He is yours. That makes him weakness." Maeron's expression fractured. "Yes," he said softly. "He is mine." And then he howled. It wasn't a sound fit for human ears. It was the sound of blood called home, of territory claimed, of bond defied by no law but nature. His claws burst from his fingers. His eyes blazed. The alpha surge, long repressed, long controlled, broke. He struck with all the fury of Fenris himself. Karath fell to one knee. "Yield," Maeron commanded, voice shaking the air. Karath bared his teeth. "Never to a traitor." Maeron's blade plunged into the altar at Karath's side, missing his throat by inches. "You will," Maeron hissed, "if you want to crawl away with your life." The warlord snarled but did not rise. The red fangs were already retreating, panic unraveling their ranks. No command held. No chant rose. Only silence remained, broken by the softest sound. A whimper. Maeron turned. Evric hung from the chains, barely conscious. His wrists bled freely, arms limp in their restraints. His skin was pale with exhaustion, flushed in places that told Maeron exactly what had been done to him. His scent, unshielded, humiliated, still lingered in the air. But there was a breath in his throat. Maeron crossed to him with a violence of urgency, slicing through the first chain with a snap of steel and will. The second followed. Then the third. Evric sagged. Maeron caught him before he could hit the stone. "Evric," he said, voice cracked open. "It's me. I'm here." Evric didn't answer. He only stirred faintly, eyelashes trembling, as though some deep part of him recognized the scent. His scent, and leaned into it. Maeron cradled him in his arms, not like a prince holding a prize, but like a man who had come to hell itself to save the only piece of his soul he could not burn away. He pressed his forehead to Evric's. "You're safe now," he whispered, breathless. "And anyone who tries to take you again will die screaming." Behind them, the blood moon flickered, and slowly, the sky began to lighten. Chapter 25, Beneath the Blood Moon. The battlefield was silent, not with peace, but with the kind of hush that comes after the last scream has fled the throat and the last sword has fallen. Smoke curled from the broken altar like incense from a desecrated temple. Ash clung to the pine trees, thick as frost, and blood soaked the earth in patches where no snow remained. Maeron sat in the ruins, his back against the shattered altar stone, holding Evric in his arms. His armor was soaked with blood, some of it his own, most not. His sword lay discarded at his feet, its edge dulled by the 100 lives it had taken to reach this moment. Above them, the blood moon still hung, huge and low, swollen like an omen that refused to set. Evric stirred. A faint flutter of lashes, a breath too shallow to count. His body remained limp, weak, worn thin by restraint and ritual and whatever poison the Red Fang priestess had laced into his veins. But his eyes opened, glassy and gray, and found Maeron through the haze. "I told you not to come," he whispered. His voice was barely air, but it cut deeper than any blade had all night. Maeron didn't flinch. He held him tighter instead, smoothing the torn remnants of a cloak over Evric's bare shoulders, hiding what the altar had revealed, what no one should have seen but him. "I know," Maeron said quietly, "but I would rather see the world burn than lose you." Evric blinked. His throat moved, but no sound came for a long moment. Then, "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why?" Maeron's voice was low, raw. "Because they're true? Because I'll believe you." Something flickered in Evric's expression. Pain, not from his injuries, but something deeper. Shame, grief, hope. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the far-off rumble of the wind shaking through broken banners and collapsed tents. Somewhere in the distance, soldiers were shouting. The survivors were gathering bodies. Vera had vanished. Maeron had let her flee, too focused on the only thing that mattered. Evric, who now lay trembling against his chest, breath shallow, skin clammy, but alive. Evric, who had endured what no one should, who had been offered to a blood-hungry moon and not broken, only bent. Evric, who was looking up at him now with the last dregs of his pride clinging to the wreckage of his heart. "I'm not yours," Evric said, and this time there were tears. Maeron stilled. "I'm not anything," Evric went on. "Not a mate, not a lover, not a—" his voice cracked. "Not even a man worth saving. I'm just an Omega who disobeyed his king, who couldn't even protect." He broke off. Maeron said nothing. He only shifted his grip, thumb brushing the tear trailing down Evric's temple. "I failed you," Evric whispered. "I'm a disgrace to the uniform, to your trust. You should have left me." "No," the word came fast, sharp. Maeron's jaw locked. "Never say that again." You didn't fail me," Maeron growled. "You kept breathing. That's all I care about. You survived." "But what's left of me?" Evric choked, the sob catching in his throat. "What part of me is still mine after what she—" His voice collapsed into silence. Maeron didn't speak. He didn't say, "You're still strong." He didn't say, "You're beautiful." He didn't say, "I care for you." He only said again what he always did. "You are my guard." Evric flinched. "Stop saying that." Maeron met his gaze. "Why?" "Because that's not all I am to you." The words hung between them, shivering like ice crystals in the wind. Evric's breath trembled. "You look at me like I'm more. You fight like I'm more. You killed for me." Maeron's hand clenched around Evric's fingers. "But when I need to hear it, when I need you to say that you feel anything—" His voice broke again. "You retreat behind duty, behind the uniform." Maeron's throat moved. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Evric laughed, shaky, broken. "See? That's the difference. You still have your mask. I don't have anything left." "You have me," Maeron said. Evric stared at him. "Do I?" Maeron didn't answer. Instead, he reached up and pressed their foreheads together, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I can't say what you want to hear," he said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." Evric closed his eyes. "But I can do this," Maeron murmured. "I can hold you until the sky burns black. I can carry you through snow and ruin. I can remind you every day that you're not broken." Evric whispered, "You can't fix what's already ruined." "I don't need to," Maeron said. "I only need you alive." Evric didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. They sat there for what felt like hours, Maeron's cloak wrapped around them both, the altar stones cooling beneath them as the heat of blood faded into the cold of night. Above, the blood moon began to dip toward the horizon. The first hints of dawn crept through the clouds. Then, a rider approached from the smoke-laced hills. Urgent, fast. Maeron turned just as the soldier dismounted, panting. "My lord," he gasped. "The capital, there's been a coup." Maeron stiffened. "What?" "The queen," the rider said. "She's moved against the regents. Half the court's in flames. They've declared you dead." Maeron stood slowly. Evric sagged in his arms, but didn't let go. "Dead?" Maeron echoed. "Yes, sire. And they've named your brother heir in your place." Maeron looked back at the altar, at the battlefield behind them, at the broken chains and the burned banners and the man in his arms who had cost him a kingdom. He looked down at Evric's blood-streaked face, half-shadowed by the dying moon, and he smiled. "Then let them crown a corpse." Chapter 26. I can't lose you. The wind had teeth in the northern passes. It howled through the jagged ridges, dragging snow in swirling arcs that never quite settled. The old pines bowed under frost, their needles stiff with silence, and nestled at the foot of a ravine, cloaked in thick canvas and surrounded by a ring of elite guards. The prince's command tent stood unmoving, untouched by time or storm. Inside it was quiet. Maeron sat at Evric's bedside. He hadn't left in 3 days. Ren had tried to speak sense into him on the first. A few of the palace physicians had dared to protest on the second. By the third, the soldiers outside had learned not to let anyone close without risking the crown prince's wrath. Maeron hadn't shouted. He hadn't needed to. He simply looked up once, when a hand touched the flap of the tent, and the man who dared turned to stone beneath the weight of the prince's glare. Only silence was allowed here now. Silence and breath. Evric's breath, shallow as a flickering candle. Maeron watched it, counting each rise and fall. The bruises along Evric's throat had begun to yellow, the wounds at his wrists scabbed beneath the linen wraps. But the worst damage lay where no medicine could reach, buried beneath his skin, behind closed eyes that twitched in restless dreams. The healers had said he might not wake. Maeron hadn't spoken since. He simply sat, legs folded, elbows on his knees, his gaze anchored to Evric's face like it was the only real thing left in the world. Outside, snow hissed against the walls. Inside, time did not move, until a breath caught, a sound, a sigh. Evric stirred, brow tightening, lips parting on a whisper too soft to hear. Maeron was on his feet in an instant. He knelt at the edge of the cot, careful not to jolt the blankets, hands hovering like he didn't dare touch. Evric! The lashes fluttered, then eyes opened, gray, glassy, dazed. Evric blinked, once, twice, then focused slowly on the man before him. His mouth moved. Maeron leaned closer. Evric's voice, when it came, was hoarse, quiet, but clear. "Your Highness," he rasped. "You can go now." Maeron froze. The words didn't register at first. They came like ice water, sharp and clean and so painfully polite they sliced deeper than any blade. Evric's gaze was cold, detached, like a soldier addressing a commander. Like everything that had passed between them had burned to ash and been scattered on the winds of war. "You've done your part," Evric said, each word slow with effort. "I'm alive. That should suffice." Maeron didn't speak. He didn't move. Evric turned his face away, breath shallow. "I know I embarrassed you. I don't expect absolution. I only ask to be dismissed in peace." Silence. Then, quietly, "I didn't save you for dignity," Maeron said. Evric didn't answer. "I didn't burn down the Redfang camp, or slaughter Karatha's line, or carry your broken body out of that cursed altar because I wanted to maintain my honor." His voice trembled now, not with anger but something far more dangerous. Unmoored. "I did it because I can't lose you." Evric turned his head back. His eyes were tired, too tired to show emotion, but the faintest crease moved through his brow. That's not something you say to a subordinate. No, Maeron agreed. It's not. Evric exhaled. Then what am I now? Maeron looked down, his fists clenched at his sides. For a long time he didn't speak. Then, you're my guard. Evric flinched. You always will be. Is that all? The words were fragile and sharp. Maeron looked at him. The bruise on his temple, the cracked skin, the gaunt cheeks that once held quiet smiles. He saw all of it and still he couldn't say it. Not the word Evric needed, just the truth as he could offer it. I can't lose you, Maeron said again. Evric laughed, bitter and quiet. You keep saying that like it means something. It does. No, Evric whispered. It means you're used to having me. Maeron didn't move. You're used to me being near, being silent, bleeding for you. His voice caught. But you don't want me, Maeron. Not really. You want control. You want certainty. You want something loyal and convenient and bound to you, just enough to feel needed. Maeron's hands opened. That's not true. Evric's eyes shimmered. I begged you not to come, he said, voice breaking. I told you I couldn't survive it if you saw me like that. Maeron's breath hitched. You came anyway. I came because you couldn't lose me, Evric spat. Not because you love me. Silence. The wind howled outside, and Maeron, who had faced down kings, torn through armies, and stood beneath prophecy's weight, could not answer. Evric turned his face away again. I will fulfill my duty, he said. I'll return to the palace. I'll report. I'll serve. His voice was cold now. But I will no longer ask for anything else. Maeron's jaw locked. Evric's fingers curled slowly over the edge of the blanket. You'll have your loyal dog, your highness. I'll even wear the collar, if that's what makes the council sleep better at night. Evric. But don't look at me like I'm more, he whispered. Not unless you're willing to say it. Not unless you're ready to mean it. Maeron reached for him. Evric flinched away. That, more than anything, shattered something in the prince. He let his hand drop. Rest, he said softly. We'll leave in the morning. Evric closed his eyes. Maeron rose and left the tent. Outside, Ren stood waiting with a sealed scroll. He handed it over wordlessly. Maeron broke the seal, unrolled the parchment, and read. A single brow arched, then lowered. She's moved fast, he muttered. The queen always does, Ren replied. What's her play? She's called the regents to trial, labeled your campaign an unsanctioned war, claimed you've abandoned the kingdom to pursue a personal vendetta. Maeron's lips thinned. Should I prepare a rebuttal? No, Maeron said, voice ice. Prepare the court. Ren hesitated. And the guard. Double it. He turned back to the tent. No one gets near him. Evric. Maeron didn't answer. Not until a long breath later, gaze fixed on the closed flap that separated them. Then he said quietly, He doesn't believe I care for him. Ren said nothing. Maeron's voice was rough. Maybe he's right. Ren tilted his head. Then why does it matter? Maeron stared into the snow for a long time before answering. Because when I thought he'd die, he said, I forgot I was a prince. He looked down at his blood-crusted hands. I only knew I was a man who couldn't live in a world where he didn't exist. Ren swallowed. You should tell him that. Maeron gave a thin smile. I did, he said. And it wasn't enough. The wind screamed again, tearing through the cliffs like a wolf through bone. Far inside the tent, Evric turned away from the cold place where Maeron had sat and didn't cry. He didn't have the strength left for tears. Chapter 27, The Kneeling Bond. The throne room of Fenris was colder than it had ever been. Even under the high arched ceilings where golden light spilled through stained glass windows, the chill of judgment clung to every corner. Rows of robed senators sat stone-faced beneath wolf-emblazoned banners. The royal dais stood tall above the gathering, its twin thrones empty save for the single golden chair reserved for the crown prince. But Maeron was not seated. He stood instead at the center of the chamber, one hand clenched on the pommel of his sword, his cloak draped back like a storm ready to break. The chamber doors creaked. Footsteps echoed. Evric entered. He wore black. No crest, no armor. Just a simple, high-collared tunic that swallowed the angles of his shoulders and made his pale face seem thinner, more breakable. Whispers bloomed like fire through dry leaves. Is that him? They say he was found in a blood ritual. Altar-bound. No alpha would keep such filth in court. The rumors are true. Then, he's an Omega, cursed and hiding. Evric kept his head high. He walked the length of the room, each step controlled, deliberate. Not too fast, not too slow. Measured like a man walking to his own execution. Maeron watched him the whole way. The room quieted. Evric reached the center. He did not look at the prince. Instead, he turned to the nobles, the very men and women who had whispered against him. Written secret missives, passed judgments from behind silken curtains. He took a breath and knelt. A sharp inhale rippled through the chamber. Evric placed one knee to the stone floor and bowed his head, his right hand curled in a fist pressed to the ground. A warrior's posture, a servant's surrender. Your graces, he said, voice low but steady. I come before you to relinquish my post. Maeron stiffened. Evric did not waver. I have failed in discipline and neutrality. My bond with His Highness has exceeded the bounds of service. I no longer trust my judgment. I no longer deem myself fit for the role of royal guard. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, a confession. Senator Vale's voice slithered across the hall. How rare. Another murmured. So he admits it. The bond is real. An Omega's madness. Maeron's hand jerked at his sword hilt. Evric did not lift his eyes. I ask for nothing but a quiet dismissal. Strip me of my title. Let my record end with this admission. I will not protest. Why should we not execute you? Came the cold voice of the High Chancellor. You deceived the crown, deceived the court, hid your nature for years. Evric flinched, but didn't speak. The Chancellor continued. A man like you near the prince? Corrupting him, drawing him into... Enough, Maeron said. He didn't raise his voice, but it cracked like thunder across the room. All eyes turned to him. He stepped forward, each stride echoing like iron on stone. When he reached Evric's side, he looked down, not with pity, not even with tenderness, but with something far more dangerous. Possession. This man, Maeron said, loud enough for all to hear, is mine. Evric's fingers curled tighter against the floor. Maeron faced the court. He has guarded me since I was 16, saved my life more times than I can count, bled for me, shielded me, stood when even I fell. His voice rose. And you dare accuse him of corruption? A pause. Do you think I am so easily led? The senators shifted. Some avoided his eyes. Others frowned. A few dared to hold his gaze, but none spoke. Maeron stepped to Evric's side. His shadow fell across the man still kneeling, his hand brushing the hilt of his sword like a threat. This man is not your prey. Evric finally spoke, soft, urgent, shaking. Your Highness, please. No, Maeron snapped. He turned back to the court. You speak of deception, yet none of you questioned my silence, my command, my will. Now you wish to unravel it all because you think he's easy to blame. He looked down again. Evric was trembling, still kneeling, still silent, still holding the only shred of dignity he had left. His posture, his silence, his refusal to rise. "Look at me," Maeron said. Evric didn't. "I said look at me." Slowly, painfully, Evric lifted his eyes. And Maeron, cold, calculating, untouchable Maeron, let the mask drop. "Just enough." "You are not dismissed," he said. Evric's lips parted. "Maeron, you are not disgraced. You are not poison. You are not weak." Evric flinched like each word hurt more than a slap. "I told you once I couldn't lose you," Maeron said. "But I didn't mean I wouldn't. I meant I wouldn't allow it. Not this way. You don't have the right." "I have every right," Maeron thundered. "Because you are my guard, my sword, my damnation and my salvation." A stunned silence spread through the court. Evric stared, breath shuddering. Then quietly, "But I'm not your equal." Maeron said nothing. "I'm not your chosen. I'm not your consort. I'm just what you use." Maeron's mouth opened, but another voice cut through the room like poisoned silk. "Well said." The queen stepped from behind the dais. Her crimson robes swept the marble like blood in water. Her lips curled in a smile too sharp to be warm. "How moving," she said. "Truly. But perhaps it is not your words we should weigh, dear nephew, but your actions." She turned to the court. This Omega's very presence here was concealed. His bond with the prince undeclared. Is this not treason? Is this not corruption? "No," Maeron said, but she raised her hand. "Let the people judge, then. Let the cities and tribes and border lords see the prince's chosen shield, and decide for themselves if he is fit to wear the crown." Maeron's jaw locked. "I will not submit to a public trial." "Then you have already lost," she whispered, "because the court of public favor is one even kings must bow to." Evric's hands clenched tighter, and Maeron, for one long, shuddering second, said nothing. The queen smiled. Evric, still on one knee, whispered without looking up, "Then let me be your scapegoat." Maeron's gaze snapped to him. "Let me fall," Evric whispered. "So you don't have to." Maeron stared, then turned back to the court. His voice was iron. "If any hand dares touch him without my order," he said, "I will see that hand severed." No one dared speak, not even the queen. Evric still knelt, his entire body trembling, head bowed so low it nearly touched the floor. It was perhaps his last act of defiance, or the final expression of love. Either way, he did not rise. Chapter 28: The War for Dignity. The chamber stank of smoke and polished brass. Fenris's Hall of Governance had never felt so claustrophobic, though it was built to impress, with its high ceiling of domed glass and crescent mosaic floor of 12 tribes. Today it only magnified the weight pressing down upon the crown prince's shoulders. Maeron stood at the center of it all. Above him loomed a half-moon of senators, cloaked in deep red and ash gray, their expressions sharpened by blood ambition. On a raised dais sat Queen Isolira, veiled in mourning black. Her eyes, however, gleamed with triumph. "Our people weep," she said smoothly, letting her fingers trail across a golden staff as if it were no more than a lover's arm. "They have lost confidence in your judgment, nephew. A prince who hides an Omega in his chambers, and worse, lies about the bond. What future does that promise our kingdom?" Maeron's jaw clenched. "Evric was my guard." She smiled with wolfish delight. "Was. And yet here we are, debating your worthiness." A murmur stirred the chamber. Senator Aldane rose. "Your Highness, we do not seek your ruin, only your concession. Step down with honor. Let the crown pass to a safer heir." "And who might that be?" Maeron's voice was flat. He knew the answer before it came. "Your cousin, Lord Renev, born of the king's third sister and blessed by the East Fire Temple." No scandal, no controversy. Just a convenient puppet, Maeron said coolly. How predictable. Another voice joined, firm, cold. And you are unpredictable. Dangerous. It was Senator Venros. You defied the High Circle by harboring an Omega bonded to you. You compromised the line of succession with personal indulgence. A scoff tugged at Maeron's mouth. You think I chose this bond? You think I asked to be tethered to someone who… He stopped. He never finished that sentence. Couldn't. Because to name what Evric was to him was to admit too much. Queen Isolira leaned forward. Then renounce him. Here. Now. End the whispers and the uncertainty. We will let you keep your title if you give us your loyalty. Maeron's voice came like steel drawn in silence. No. The room stilled. I would rather lose this crown than give up the only thing in this God's-forsaken court that was ever mine without coercion. Isolira's lips thinned. So you choose a disgraced Omega over a kingdom. No, Maeron met her gaze. I choose not to be a man who abandons the ones who bled for him. Another senator cried out, This is treason. He disobeys the realm's demand. And still breathes only because I have not yet tired of your voices, Maeron replied. For a long moment no one moved, and then a door opened at the back of the hall. Maeron's spine stiffened. Footsteps, measured, familiar, Evric. He walked into the council chamber alone, unarmed save for a ceremonial blade strapped across his back. His hair had been hastily tied back, streaked still with soot and sweat. He looked paler than usual, but no less resolute. Whispers exploded across the room. Maeron stepped forward, but Evric held up a hand, just enough to halt him. Then, slowly, deliberately, Evric moved to the center of the chamber, to the exact spot Maeron had stood just minutes before, and dropped to his knees, not in shame, not in surrender, in choice. Evric, don't… Maeron's voice was hoarse. Evric did not look at him. He unsheathed the blade, held it in both hands, and pressed the flat of it to the floor. I am not here to beg for favor, he said, voice quiet but cutting. I am here to relieve His Highness of the burden I have become. Maeron's fists clenched. Evric kept going. The bond between us was never his intent. It was fate's cruelty. My nature, my deception, my weakness brought disgrace to the royal line. Evric, Maeron warned, you will not speak about yourself that way in front of them. Evric's gaze didn't rise. But it's true. He pressed his forehead to the hilt of the sword. I will return to exile. I ask for no pardon, no memory. Only that this court cease using my name to destroy a man who was only ever kind to me. Maeron took a step forward. You don't get to do this. Finally, Evric looked up, and his eyes, gods, they were hollowed out and brimming, as if he'd spent the entire morning carving his soul into something sharp enough to be handed over. Don't make this harder, Evric whispered. I couldn't bear it if I ruined you too. You haven't ruined me. I have, he said, and that was the first time Evric had ever raised his voice to him in public. Look around you. You are a breath away from losing the throne. I won't be the nail in your crown's coffin. Maeron's heart was hammering. You think I care about that? He whispered. Evric stared at him, and Maeron, desperate, aching, spoke again, low enough that only Evric could hear. You know I can't say it. Evric's throat worked. I know, he said, and his voice trembled. That's why I'm leaving. He rose, leaving the blade on the ground. His knees buckled slightly, but he didn't ask for help. He didn't reach out. He didn't look back. Maeron didn't stop him. Couldn't. His limbs refused to move, as if the very act of watching Evric go was being carved into his bones. Evric walked the length of the chamber. The doors opened and closed. Maeron stood still long after the echo faded. long after the senators whispered triumph, long after Isolira gave the order to reconvene at dawn. He remained there, staring at the empty place Evric had knelt. When Ren approached from the side and murmured that the Queen's forces had begun moving toward the fire tower, that smoke had risen over the northern wall, that the remnants of the Red Fang were on the move again, Maeron only said one thing: "Find him." Ren hesitated. "Evric." Maeron's voice was steel. "If he dies, none of this matters." And beneath the dimming glass dome of the council hall, Maeron turned, already marching toward war, toward ash, toward ruin, but never again away from him. Chapter 29. You Are My Weakness. The wind howled like a starving wolf across the snowbound plains of the northern front. Tents strained against their posts, canvas flapping like the wings of dying birds. The scent of iron and ice was thick in the air, and beneath it, something older, dread, sharpened by the weight of a name scrawled in blood. Evric. The message had arrived before dawn, tied to a broken spear hurled over the outer barricade. A single sentence carved into bone: "Give us the Omega, and the war ends." No signature, but they knew. Karath had returned. Now, Maeron stood at the edge of the frozen slope, overlooking the forest below where torchlights blinked like dying stars in the trees. He was wrapped in black command furs, his silver pauldrons catching the flicker of the watchfires. He did not speak for a long time. Behind him, Evric waited. He wore a plainer cloak than usual, half-fastened and dusted with frost. His breath fogged the air between them. He had said nothing when Maeron ordered him brought along, had not resisted, but his silence was a knife that sliced deeper than any protest. "You shouldn't have come," Maeron said at last, without turning. "I didn't choose to," Evric replied coldly. "You summoned me." Maeron finally turned to face him. There was no heat in his gaze, only bleak conviction. "If they want you so badly, I will not leave you behind for them to take." Evric gave a short, humorless laugh. "Is that what this is? A show of chivalry?" He stepped forward, eyes bright with accusation. "Or is this just guilt, still trying to make peace with the truth you won't say aloud?" Maeron's voice was quiet, deadly. "What truth is that? That I was your guard, your Omega, and your secret shame all at once." Maeron didn't flinch. "You were never my shame. You never let them see the mark," Evric snapped, dragging his collar aside with one hand to reveal the faded imprint below his neck, the crescent scar, half-healed, a relic of their broken bond. "You bound me and buried me in silence. And now I'm your weakness, is that it? Dragged here like bait for your enemies." Maeron stepped close, until their breath mingled in the freezing air. "No," he said, each word ground between his teeth. "You are my weakness, and I would burn kingdoms before I let them use you against me again." The words struck hard, heavier than any blow. Evric stared at him, frozen, but not from the cold. In the silence, the soldiers at the camp perimeter exchanged glances. One of them, young, curious, too loud for his own good, muttered something about Omegas under his breath. Maeron turned, voice like thunder. "Anyone who dares insult him dares insult me." The camp fell deathly still. Even Ren, standing at a respectful distance, blinked at the rawness of the declaration. Evric's lips parted. You just admitted it." "I'm done hiding," Maeron said. "But you still won't claim me." Maeron said nothing. Not yes, not no. Just silence that screamed between them. That night the wind died, the frost deepened, and death crept like a whisper through the camp. The assassin came just before moonrise, a shadow slithering through the sleeping tents, blade dipped in blackthorn venom. No one saw him until it was too late. Evric awoke with the taste of metal in his mouth and the scent of Maeron's skin near his face. Not skin. Blood. There was a blade embedded in the ground beside his cot. And Maeron, shirtless, unshaven, eyes sunken with the weight of no sleep, was kneeling over him with one hand pressed to his cheek. "Still with me?" Maeron's voice was hoarse. Evric blinked. What happened?" "You were poisoned. But you'll live." Maeron swallowed. "Ren got to you in time." Evric tried to sit up. The world spun. "Easy," Maeron said, pushing him gently back down. "You passed out for almost 12 hours." Evric stared at the ceiling of the tent. "You stayed." Maeron didn't answer immediately. He leaned closer instead, eyes scanning every inch of Evric's face like he was memorizing the shape of breath. And then, without fanfare or drama, he pressed his lips to Evric's brow. A kiss. The first one that wasn't born of fire or need or fury. It was reverent. "I thought I'd lost you," Maeron whispered, "and it broke something in me I didn't know could still break." Evric lay very still. "You shouldn't say things like that," he murmured. "Why?" Maeron asked. "Because I want to believe you." Maeron brushed a thumb along his temple. "Then believe me, just this once." Evric didn't answer, but he didn't turn away either. Outside, the frost deepened. The wind screamed through the pine in jagged sobs. Somewhere, Karatha's army stirred, waiting for weakness. But inside the tent, beneath wool and shadow, Maeron knelt beside the one thing he had always feared to love, and finally, loved him anyway. Chapter 30, The Throne Beside Me. The bells tolled as dawn split the horizon, casting golden veins through the stained glass arches of the Ascension Hall. Their echo rolled over the marble pillars and out across the capital, each peal a mark of a kingdom reborn. The war was over. Fenris had not fallen, and the prince they had once sought to strip of power now stood at the threshold of his coronation, his shadow long and unmoving at the base of the stairs. Maeron wore no crown yet. He stood in a doublet of black and silver, the wolf sigil stitched over his heart in crimson thread. His sword, ceremonial and unbloodied, hung at his hip, not as a symbol of conquest, but of resolve. His hands were bare. The great hall was silent, packed with nobles, generals, emissaries, and common folk alike. Not a single voice dared to speak, because they were all watching the same thing. Or rather, watching what Maeron was not looking at. He should have walked the steps by now. Should have approached the altar where the crown of Fenris waited on velvet. Should have signaled the priests. Instead, he stood unmoving at the base of the dais, and his gaze searched for something in the shadows beyond the columns. Evric Thornefell was not where he was meant to be. He should have stood with the royal guard, armored, anonymous, silent. But Evric had abandoned that armor. He stood half-obscured behind one of the marble pillars, wearing only a fitted black tunic, no crest on his shoulder, no blade at his waist. His place was nowhere now, and yet he was there, visible, vulnerable, silent. His hand, bound with fresh gauze from the assassination attempt days prior, curled at his side. His posture betrayed nothing, but his eyes begged him not to speak. Maeron stepped forward. The steps creaked beneath his boots. The crowd stirred, anticipating the ceremony. The high priest raised the tome of oaths, but Maeron did not ascend. He turned to face the assembly. "I know what you all expect of me," he said, his voice ringing clear. "A king crowned, a kingdom mended, a line preserved." He paused, and then, to the collective confusion of everyone watching, his gaze veered sharply left, toward the shadowed pillar. "Before this kingdom, before this throne, I make one vow." He extended his hand. "Evric Thornefell," he said, voice steady, "is not merely my guard, not merely the man who bled for me. He is not a servant. He is not a shadow." Maeron drew breath, slow and deliberate. He is my chosen, my equal, my partner, and if I am to wear this crown, I will wear it beside him or not at all. A sound rippled through the hall. It wasn't gasps, it was silence shifting shape. Shock so total that it distorted the air itself. All eyes turned to Evric. He didn't move. Not immediately, but his throat worked around a breath, and his lashes trembled, and one tear slipped without permission down his cheek. Still, he did not run. Not this time. He stepped forward. Slowly, as if each motion rewrote the bones in his legs, Evric emerged from the column's shadow and into the light of the throne. He didn't look at the nobles. He didn't look at the high priest. He looked only at Maeron. "I warned you once," he said, his voice hoarse, "that walking beside me would cost you everything." Maeron smiled. "You were wrong," he said softly. "It gave me everything." Evric's hands shook, but he lifted them, and Maeron caught them in his own like they were glass and fire, lowering himself, yes, lowering himself, onto one knee before the man no one in this hall had dared call anything but the guard. "I swear by my blood and crown," Maeron said, voice steady even as it broke, "to kneel only once in this life, and it is now before you." Evric choked out a breath, tears falling freely now. This isn't what we agreed," he whispered. "No," Maeron said. "It's more." He rose, one hand still tangled in Evric's, and finally turned toward the dais. This time they walked the stairs together. The high priest hesitated as they approached, eyes darting between them, unsure of protocol. Maeron simply said, "Proceed," and when the crown touched his brow, the king did not sit until the second chair, brought from the chamber, dusted, never used, was placed beside his own. Evric sat beside him, hands still trembling. Maeron didn't let go. Later, long after the hall had emptied and the crown rested heavy on his head, Maeron led Evric to the royal solar where candlelight flickered across old stone and fresh parchment. Evric touched the windowsill absently, as if trying to ground himself. "This changes everything," he murmured. "I know, and there will be consequences." "I know," Maeron repeated. Evric turned. "You didn't say you love me." Maeron stepped close, so close their bodies brushed like the memory of flame. "I didn't have to," he said, "but I will." He leaned in, lips just grazing Evric's jaw. "I love you." Evric closed his eyes, and for the first time let himself believe it. Outside, the moon rose over the quiet capital. Far below, in the old archives, a single page lay preserved under glass, a child's blood-marked vow. "I will give my life to the one who saves me from it." The ink had long faded, but the promise had not.